For the past 2 years, we've been in a major dispute with CVRD regarding our farm operations. And we've been commended by the Agricultural Lands Commission as an exemplary example of what farms can do within the Agricultural Lands Commission rules, but we are regularly and continually criticized and condemned by CVRD staff for our operations.
Excuse me, you're on the line.
I understand.
So,
and I'm not trying to be sensational.
But hear me out for a second.
Yeah.
We're here trying to conduct the business of the community, and I understand if you've had challenging times, but part of my responsibility and our responsibility is to make sure that this is a safe environment, not only for the people in the gallery, but for staff who are in attendance here and who do the work of the community. So I would really ask you to please be respectful of that, and if need be, make no mention, say you've got concerns, but we really have to be respectful of the place we're in.
I totally appreciate that comment, and I'm not here to try to, damage or say anything damaging to CVRD staff. I very much appreciate the work that CVRD does for the community, absolutely. I just am trying to express that we have had some real struggles and have some very deep personal experiences with this topic.
Thank you.
So we've spent countless hours and tens of thousands of dollars defending ourselves over the last couple of years. It's been a really major dilemma. And I'm sharing this with you not to sound sensational, but to communicate that I have a deep and personal understanding of the impact that these zoning bylaws have on local farms and people in the community, and how important it is that we get this right for the future of farmers and farms in the Valley. We deeply appreciate the fact that CVRD is making an effort to accelerate the update of the ag zoning bylaw, and I was elated to think that we might actually have a new ag zoning bylaw in place by Q1, Q2 of 2025. That would be absolutely amazing, because it can't come soon enough as far as we're concerned. But the proposed draft document that was put forward, we're finding to be quite incomplete, inadequate for our needs as a farming community. We don't feel that it meets best practices within the community, and also that we found that there were several inconsistencies with the Agricultural Lands Commission Act and use regulations and with the CVRD OCP. So we found a lot of issues with that draft document that was put forward, and ultimately we found that it really doesn't support the needs and desires of local farmers in the larger community. We went through a big effort last year to put together a lot of comments. We commented on the MOCP process. A lot of those comments were kind of set aside at that time and not incorporated into the MOCP, and we were told that it was because they were being viewed as being part of zoning bylaw issues and updates. And when we read through this document, we felt like there was a lot of the feedback that we had provided that had not been addressed in that document, and certainly isn't going to serve us and promote farming in the community in the long run. Ultimately, we need an ag zoning bylaw that supports farmers and helps them become economically viable so that we can continue farming. And we need an ag zoning bylaw that encourages people to start farming and encourages farmers to increase production so that we can see growth in the sector, and ultimately so that we can see increased food security for the community. The proposed ag zoning bylaw is far from providing any of that. So we ask today that the committee does not approve the release of this document for public and agency review until CVRD staff has adequately engaged the agricultural community, and that the ag zoning bylaw should be developed in coordination with the agricultural community, and that we're happy to support CVRD's efforts in any way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. I would go to Jenny next.
There we go.
Could you sort of aim it in your direction?
Yeah.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. My name is Jennifer Holden, and I am speaking to R8, specifically point 5. As some of you may know, myself, my partner, and the co-tenants on our land have been in an open case with the CVRD Bylaw Enforcement Division regarding our tiny home. They currently want us gone by July 1st, which is 2 weeks from today. This has been an ongoing experience since October. After putting all of our resources into our tiny home build last year and thankfully securing a beautiful piece of land to reside on, 2 weeks later, the CVRD bylaw enforcement officer informed our landlord that our tiny home, as well as another trailer, must be removed. This is not the first time we've come and spoke at this meeting, and I feel that a part of being here is to continue to reiterate the common message of the realities of the current housing crisis and being told by bylaw enforcement to move our home to another property in which we would still be at significant risk of being relocated over and over and over again if a complaint was made. This just doesn't really make sense, and therefore we have chosen to stay and to advocate actively for a change in the regulatory structure to allow for us to stay where we are. It is our belief that if you, the directors, knew the extent of our experience and interactions with bylaw, that the question of discretion would be considered, and I know that's on the agenda today. I know that there's some, I'm hesitant to say that our experience with bylaw enforcement staff has not been, in our minds, meeting the question of what is discretionary, compassionate, and considerate to our health and well-being. And I hope that when you reach that item, that there is a consideration from the citizens affected as to what discretionary actually means for our situation. And so as we've continued to navigate the bureaucracy and the process of how to create a framework or to advocate for a framework in which we are allowed to stay meeting specific health and safety guidelines, we are still in the process of being forced out of our current situation. And that we do not feel as if there has been due process around health and safety standards of our particular situation. That is our experience. And so when looking at policies around discretion, we ask that certain standards be upheld and applied to the case-by-case basis, including ourselves, while the bigger systemic policy changes are underway, which we hope that you are all still considering, and that this current item is not in lieu of the necessary work to create a framework that allows for people to house themselves adequately during a housing crisis.
Jenny, can I ask you to conclude your remarks? You've had in excess of 3 minutes.
Okay. Finally, regarding health and safety, we just believe that these homes have the capability, and ours included, to meet those standards, and we would like an opportunity to actually be in that process. And so far, we have not been. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I've got Kim on the list. Would you like to provide input to the committee today? And I believe Kim is the last speaker today. So go ahead. Welcome.
Good day, Mr. Chair. I squales, siemnasiea, natsamat squalawan. Together we rise and move forward. Thank you so much. I'm very encouraged. My name's Kim Bernard, and I'm from Schwellican, Shawnigan Lake. Looking behind me at the level of public input today, I'm speaking to the participatory process that's outlined in each and every meeting. And I'd like to first say that if you want to foster and nurture this sort of organic and very freely delivered public input, it shouldn't be suppressed. It should be welcomed. It's not fireworks or a pent-up fire hose, but perhaps each and every one of the elected officials at this meeting have an intentional irrigation system. So they have a steady line of information going back and forth amongst their electorates. They welcome the drips. They coax out the wells. They sit by the rivers and streams to listen and look to their elders for that quiet and tacit knowledge. They find ways to be approachable and mindful. And in fact, in 3 minutes or less, most of us can offer our number one takeaways if we happen across your path in the community. I want to say kudos. Staff were so friendly, helpful, and approachable at our recent community assessment exercises, both in Mill Bay on Monday, in Shawnigan yesterday, and today in Cobble Hill. They created a welcoming space. I could call them out by name, but I might miss someone. There's a few of them here today, and also our alternate director, Champ, for Shawnigan Lake. I would like to live in a community that's kudos-driven, not complaint-driven. I know that each of you bring your A game to this table. You are values-driven, and you want to know what the values are of your electorate. Unfortunately, it's intimidating that the public input process is only 3 minutes or less. I've been to many a meeting here where I wished that the discussion process at this table was 3 minutes or less. It would be only fair to make those points succinctly. But most of all, I think that again, just we need to welcome that nurturing, steady rain of authentic and timely public opinion so that we know how to respond in a very caring and compassionate way. I am so moved by the stories I've already heard. I want to remember and believe that healthy and united communities are possible, and especially for my own community, trying to have a united voice is such a challenge. So thanks again for the opportunity to give public input, and I'll look forward to observing this meeting today. Heichka.
Thank you, Ms. Bernard. It appears we have just under 2 minutes. If there's anyone that wants to squeeze in a couple of minutes of comment just at the end of our public input period, I would offer you the opportunity now. Welcome.
My name is Les Jameson. I am counsel for...
Can you turn your mic on?
Sorry, didn't press the button again. Okay. My name is Les Jameson. I'm counsel for the...
Excuse me, are you an applicant on one of the files here?
R1.
Okay, if you're an applicant, you'll be given an opportunity to speak during the application process.
Okay. I was just going to make a remark, since nobody else got up, that we are applying to have the matter withdrawn today and moved to a different date. So whenever you want to deal with that.
We'll deal with that when it comes up, I guess. Thank you. So with that draws, unless there's someone that we got a couple of minutes that has a burning desire to share. Seeing none, move to the next item, which would be Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We don't have any delegations, correspondence, or information. We move to reports of R1.
So at this, yes. So as I stated earlier, we can, the chair can reorder the agenda at any time. So I think now I'd like to take a moment to hear what Director Wilson was suggesting. So Director Wilson, when you initially spoke during agenda adoption, you went really fast and I didn't track exactly what you were saying. So could you give us a brief description of what you would like to see?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I was trying to be succinct and less than 3 minutes. But anyway, we've got the item. The reason I'm asking for this is that I, in particular, have a very, very tight agenda today, or schedule today. We have the South Cowichan issues forums, one of which is my area today, and I would obviously like to attend that between 4 and 6 o'clock this afternoon. I also have an APC. Of these items that are on the agenda, are 1, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are of particular interest to me. So I would like to shift them around so that I can be present for discussion on these while I have the time available. I did try and get my alternate to attend, but that was not possible because of him not being in the area at the moment. So I respectfully ask that we rearrange so we have 1, followed by 6, 7, 8, and 9, please.
Thank you for that. I'm going to take a quick break and confer with staff.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your request, Director Wilson. After due consideration input from staff, we will be proceeding with the agenda as published. And let's hope we can count on everyone to proceed succinctly and with due haste. And I will now call on Mr. Buchan to present R1, please.
Thank you. And there is a slideshow. And on to the first slide, please. Thank you. The purpose of this application is to present a combined official community plan amendment and rezoning application for the property at 1755 Mill Bay Road. The agent proposes to rezone a portion of the property to a modified light industrial I-1B zone to facilitate a range of industrial, commercial, and residential uses. Next slide, please. The property is located in Electoral Area A with road frontage on Mill Bay Road, Trans-Canada Highway, Bamberton Road, and Trousey Road. Apologies if I mispronounced that. As you can see on the slides attached, it's non-contiguous, so portions are severed by roads. Next slide, please. The lands were previously zoned F1 forestry. However, in 2011, the board considered and subsequently approved a combined OCP amendment and rezoning application to redesignate portions of the property to different industrial zones. This included requirements that the proposed uses be contingent on community servicing for water and sewer. Next slide, please. The lands were also identified in the 2019 Industrial Land Use Strategy, which noted significant potential for future industrial uses subject to connectivity to community servicing. And next slide, please. The existing zoning permits a range of industrial uses on portions of the site, subject to community water and community sewer servicing as a condition of use. As of the date of this application, no community sewer or water is available to the site. However, the lands have been developed in contravention of the CVRD bylaws. This includes the establishment of a propane storage and distribution use, which is not permitted in the existing zoning. Next slide, please. The subject lands are currently split zoned into two different industrial zones, as well as the rural resource zone. The agent proposes to consolidate the two existing industrial zones into a single broader industrial zone and add a portion of the rural lands to the industrial designation. The agent has indicated that should the rezoning be approved, they intend to lease portions of the site. Attached on screen is a plan that shows how the lands would potentially be split up for leasing. The agent did provide an updated version of this at 12:03 p.m. today, but I do not have that available on the slide. Next slide, please. The proposed zone includes 32 additional permitted uses, the removal of the requirement for community and water servicing, and this would also facilitate rezoning portions of the land severed by the highway, which would trigger an OCP amendment to go from resource to industrial. Next slide, please. The application was referred to internal divisions and preliminary comments have been received. Utilities has confirmed that there's no request for the creation of a service area. Bylaw enforcement advises that there are outstanding compliance and enforcement matters. The agent has provided a report from a qualified environmental professional drafted this year, and that report also includes references to previous reports, some from 2012. The CVRD's environmental planner has noted that more information is required to understand the baseline environmental conditions and restrictions to inform rezoning. This feedback is echoed by a provincial ecosystem biologist who notes that prior to 2012, the area that has been disturbed likely contained red or blue listed ecological communities. Next slide, please. Staff have recommended that the application be denied due to inconsistency with the official community plan. Should the board consider this recommendation, option 2 is an additional option for staff to return with options looking at rezoning the entirety of the lands to a rural resource zone. Other options are available, including the requirement of additional information, as well as modifications to the proposal. If the board selects this option, staff have recommended that the information be requested within a 60-business day timeframe. Another option is to advance as is, but this would be contrary to staff recommendations. I'm here for questions, and I believe the agent is in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buchan. So for procedurally, so everyone knows the path that we'll follow, I'm going to entertain questions from directors to staff. And upon completion of that, we will then ask if the applicant has anything that they would like to provide us as far as additional information and the likes, and to hopefully take questions from directors if there are some. And then we will go to the director for the area and decide on what direction we will go. So with that, I look to the directors online and in the boardroom and ask, are there any questions for staff at this time? Director Segal.
Thank you, Mr. Buchan, for the report. With regards to servicing, I believe there's a water license on Oliphant Lake, but that doesn't qualify for community. Like, community water would be connecting to Mill Bay Water District.
Through the chair, the community water district could be an option. The CVRD could look at establishing a service area for a community system that we operate. The private license is not a community system, to answer the question, though.
Look online and to directors around the table. Any, where am I missing? Director McClinton. Floor is yours.
Chair. Just curious,
Can you speak up, please?
how's that? A little better? No? I will talk as loud as I can. Just curious if there is, we're in need, I was going to say desperate need, but we're definitely in need of light industrial land in the region. Is there a path forward that's, some of the lands as you see it? I know we're denying this one based on your recommendations, or that's the recommendation, but can you see a path forward with consultation?
Mr. Buchan.
Through the chair, if the board denies this application, the agents could look at reapplying. I believe it's within a 12-month timeframe. Option 3 also provides an option for them to reduce the amount of uses and provide additional information to inform the rezoning application.
And can I just seek clarification on that? The committee, through the board, has the ability to reduce that reapplication time, should we recommend that, correct?
Yes, that would be through a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn to anyone else with questions for Mr. Buchan at this time. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Buchan. And now I would like to invite the applicants, if you would like to come forward to the microphone and provide any additional information, thoughts to committee. You need to make sure the microphone's on. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Roy Aresh. I represent the applicant. We would appreciate if we'd have an opportunity to work with staff and assess the needs that they propose would be appropriate for the area. We have been approached numerous times that there is a significant demand for light industrial uses in the area, and that's why we actually partially made our submittal. Also, the uses that we currently have on site are designed to help with the general community area. For example, we have one company, 090, that builds trusses and builds walls for apartment buildings. Just one example of what the use is. The other, the current propane use happens to be Superior Propane. They came to the site because they felt it was necessary to have a location in the CVRD in the south area to be able to supply the needs of the community. And they actually built their facility there on that location for that reason. We would like to have an opportunity to be able to work closely with staff to determine the kinds of uses that would be appropriate for the site. As the community water and sewer, there have been numerous conversations I've had in the past with the CVRD staff about the idea of bringing community water and sewer to the area. And the discussion has been that the likelihood of that is, at best, far, far off in the future. We have been working closely with the Malahat Nation They are building their business park across the highway from us. And they're going to be developing their own infrastructure for water and sewer. And we have actually been offered the ability to tie into their system. The only problem being, of course, is that that system will take a few years. They've already getting the funding for it, but it'll take a few years to actually develop and finalize. The purpose behind that is the water from Oliphant Lake would flow through our property to the Malahat Business Park, and they would like to basically work with us in regards to using that aspect as well as being able to connect to our systems. Fundamentally, our approach here is we're trying to provide a resource to the community, and we're looking to work with the CVRD in providing that. We have perceived that we have been doing things accordingly and appropriately, but again, we're learning the process also, and we found that we have made some mistakes, and we're trying to rectify those. The only other issue I can bring up at this time is that we do have access to 800,000 liters of water a day from Oliphant Lake. So the availability of water is not an issue. And again, the current uses that we have on site don't require water. I mean, basically, almost all of the users on site are low impact. They have porta potties and actually bring water to the site for their employees' needs. That's my allocated time. Thank you.
Thank you. You may have some questions posed to you, so just hang on for a minute. So I would go to committee. Any questions for the applicant? Director Abbott.
Quickly, Chair, Mr. Raresh, how many liters a day from Oliphant?
800,000.
800,000, thank you.
Looking online and around the committee room, I see Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. No difficult question, but if perhaps you could just elaborate on one or two of the mistakes that you would, like to try to rectify if you were to have more time with staff.
So we, in 2012, had an environmental expert, or RP Bio, basically come through and assess that there were no environmental issues and no riparian issues on the property. We want to make sure we unfortunately did not become fully aware of the development permit requirement for additional studies to be done. We've had those additional studies done, and there were questions raised about those studies. So we'd like to have an opportunity to have a third environmentalist to come out and assess any issues or questions that might be existing in regards to any sensitive ecosystems or any riparian issues.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Director Abbott.
Again, Chair, back to servicing, Mr. Raresh. How many years before a treatment plant with 800,000 liters potentially arriving on site, it has to be processed? Can you forecast when, working with Malahat tribes, you might have a treatment system?
That's the actual water that we have access to from the Oliphant Lake. That water would then be supplied to the Malahat. So between us and the Malahat, we have access to 800,000 liters. The Malahat actually have the other 70% of the lake is theirs also. The idea would actually be we already have a pipeline that comes to our property, and from that pipeline it continues down to Bamberton site. The idea here would be to actually divert some of that water from the Bamberton site to the actual Malahat Reserve and their development on that side of the property. So the expectation is they're looking at within the next 3 to 5 years is what they're looking at. They already have a sewage system they're putting in place because they're currently building a significant number of industrial uses on their site. And that's been a very important part here. We've been working very, very closely with the Malahat. Originally, we were designated as a business park for the area, but once the Malahat took over that responsibility, we felt it was far more appropriate for us to kind of step back, allow them to be the business park for the next few years to bring in, as many tenants as possible. We'd be doing more of the low-impact light industrial uses, be an incubator in a sense for them to allow that when a tenant came to our site, got a feel for the market, got a feel for the area, and decided that they wanted to do a long-term lease, and they would actually move from our site to the Malahat Business Park. And then once the Malahat Business Park was complete, we would then become the next business park. But at this point, they're the ones who we need to be able to support and help. But there's this dichotomy that we're working towards, whereby they take the long-term users, we take the short-term users, and we basically work very closely together to support the area in general.
Does that conclude?
Thank you. I guess before, at question period, we heard from your representative that he had a suggestion, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on that or if that's the time to ask.
We were hoping to pull the application for the time being so that we could answer the questions that have been raised by staff. I went through the rezoning process a number of years ago when we did the actual Bamberton rezoning, and it was a system whereby we worked very closely with staff, getting ideas from them, working with them, understanding what the needs of the community was. It was a very good process to assess directly from staff what's needs are, Unfortunately, in this round, we haven't had that opportunity. It's been kind of like almost a Chinese wall, whereby we'd ask questions and we were told we weren't allowed to talk to different departments to get their input. So like, for example, I reached out to the Economic Development Department and I was told, no, you can't reach out to them until after the applications is submitted. I think it's important that we have that opportunity to be able to discuss with them and create the right scenario for the site and for the area. So that's.
Thank you. Looking around the room and online, Director Nicholson?
Thank you. It seems to me that a close relationship with Malahat is in your best interest.
It is.
And I'm wondering what you're doing to align what you'd like to do with their cultural and stewardship values.
So we have been working very, very closely with Josh and the staff. I met with Josh again yesterday. I met with him actually 3 times this week, looking at how do we correlate their needs with our needs. We have been looking at, as I said, using resources jointly and also assessing what they perceive we should be doing on our site. And that actually is where we came up with the idea of actually doing the short-term leases on our side and not poaching any users from their side. Did that answer the question, or is it?
Well, we received a letter from the Malahat which indicates that they're not completely happy with.
I noticed that also, and I've asked Josh immediately to please contact me to say what the problems are.
I guess my point is it just seems like there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Which we intend to do. I mean, the Malahat are, the way we look at it is the Malahat are the ones that we need to keep happy, because they are the ones who are going to be integral into the development of the area. I mean, when I spoke to Josh a little while ago, he's looking at bringing in significant new businesses and residential opportunities to the area, and we'll be a small component of that process for them. We're learning.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. You can have your seat. I understand that the director for the area wants to pose another question to the planner. So, Mr. Buchan. Director Segal.
Thank you. I'm sorry that I don't get all my questions out at the appropriate time. So in this letter that we have from Malahat Nation, I don't know if you've had a chance to discuss with this department, but in the end, they support CVRD staff's recommendation for further review prior to approval, which doesn't seem to really align with what's recommended. And I guess I would like to see that this applicant does right to Malahat Nation in terms of the potential environmental contraventions they mentioned in this letter, as well as to comply with any CVRD enforcement issues. So I guess my first question is if you can clarify what this, supporting staff's recommendation, but that's not what.
Thank you, through the chair. I don't wish to speak on behalf, but it could be that is a reference to option 3, which is asking for more information and refinements to the application.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
So does option 3 also require that enforcement files are closed before moving forward? Or is enforcement not mentioned?
Enforcement is currently ongoing, and I can't speak to enforcement because I'm not a bylaw enforcement officer.
Director Martman. Is this a question for staff, or are you contemplating?
No, for staff.
Okay.
I'll leave that for the director of the area, the other question you're going to ask me. You know, when I read through, I guess it helps to read option 3 from a perspective of what might be missing. I think that's a litany of things, but one of the 2 things strike, and I don't know how these things occur, but how does buildings get erected, septic get put in place, and the CVRD apparently has no awareness or no approval or no permitting of these things? That's a question, I think.
I don't, sorry, through the chair, I don't know if that's a question that I can answer, because that's, the normal process is to approach us for approvals for building permits.
And is that, I guess from a perspective of process, is that something that is like obscure, or is that sort of like upfront? Like anytime you put a building up, you need to go through a permitting process. Anytime you put a septic in place, is that sort of a?
So through the chair, in this particular case, there's development permits that are triggered, there's building permits that are triggered. There's also a covenant on title that speaks to requirements to do prior to disrupting the lands.
Thank you.
I'm going to call a 3-minute recess. Welcome back, everyone. Turn to the director for the area.
Thank you. I'd like to refer this to the July 17th meeting.
Is there a seconder? It's been moved and seconded. Go ahead, Director Segal.
I just wanted to say, I just feel like I need a lot more time to understand the many angles of this and understand Malahat Nation's involvement and the right before making a decision on how to move forward.
Any other discussion, comment? Director Martman.
So
Remember, it's
on
a
the
referral
propriety of
motion.
referral,
Yep.
I think the question is just for time, not to direct staff to do anything in the next 2 weeks.
I
Just want to clarify that.
think that the actions that are in motion continue to be in motion. This gives the applicants an opportunity to clarify their discussions with Malahat First Nations, and it gives the applicants and our staff an opportunity to discuss further any things that they wish to discuss. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Oh, did we have another hand? Director Deck? It's on the propriety of referral.
Okay, I guess I'm going from the staff recommendation and all the information that was in that fantastic report about non-conforming and going ahead without permits. So, I mean, I'm wondering what's going to change in a couple of weeks that would give us any confidence that the contraventions are going to stop or be rolled, turned back in time,
That's not the intent of this motion. This is time. If you would like to.
I can't support it.
Fair enough. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? One opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R2, report from the Development Services Division regarding frontage exemption to allow subdivision of 1490 Shawnigan Millbay Road, PID 000305511.
Welcome, Mr. Benna.
Thank you, Chair. This is a frontage exemption request for a 2-lot subdivision in Electoral Area B. The proposal includes two dwellings that are existing, and they want to subdivide so that there's a dwelling on each lot. The existing driveway access will be utilized rather than constructing another driveway that would cross over the riparian area protection regulation applicable stream. So they'll be registering an easement to grant access to the proposed Lot B. However, the frontage for proposed Lot B does not meet the 10% frontage requirement of the Local Government Act. In Section 12, it's measured at 6.3%. So I am here to recommend that exemption be granted. I can take questions.
Any director's questions for staff? And could we lower the presentation, please? Thank you. Seeing none, who's the director for this one? Alternate Director Champ, would you like to make a recommendation?
I would like to move that, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, hang on, I should ask, does the applicant have anything they'd like to add to the staff report if the applicant's in the room? Please come up. Welcome.
Thank you. So a couple of years ago now, we went through this whole piece about the minimum of 10% with the property line. I brought in a check to the CBRD and a letter asking for this exact process. And I was told at that time by a casual employee who'd come back, a retiree as a planner to help out in the summertime, that it wasn't required because of maybe a misinterpretation of part of the bylaw. So I'm not trying to derail any good work here because I want this to be approved. But for those that come behind me, running into the same problem, 14.7 of the Area B bylaw says the minimum frontage of the parcels shall be 10% of the perimeter. However, in in 14.9 panhandle lots, when a panhandle is created as an integral part of the parcel, the frontage requirement in section 14.7 shall not be calculated for the panhandle portion fronting the highway, but for the width of the lot area fronting the extension of the panhandle. And there's a description in the bylaw that shows the panhandle width and then the main body of the property that it's accessing. So I'm kind of wondering why we're here, if there's a bylaw that says we don't need to be here. That's all.
Great question. Probably shouldn't be put to us and should be put to a staff person.
Never been here before. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Appreciate you coming up and posing that question, and I'm sure Mr. Benna will be more than happy to have a discussion with you following the conclusion of this matter. We didn't have a motion yet, did we? Were you going to move this?
Yes, I was.
And do we have a seconder? And do we need to read the resolution? Please do.
Thank you, Chair. That it be recommended to the board that the proposed Lot B in subdivision application number SA 22B03 1490 Shawnigan Mill Bay Road, PID 000305511, be exempted from the minimum parcel frontage requirement in accordance with Section 512 of the Local Government Act.
Everybody ready? Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. For your information, this recommendation will go to the board meeting on Wednesday, June 24th for consideration and hopefully ratification. Thank you for coming. Ms. Boyd, next item.
Thank you, Chair. We're on R3, report from the Development Services Division regarding application number COV21B02, Covenant Amendment Malahat Forest Estates, Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake.
Ms. Pressman, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but the report to summarize is that this previously came before the board, this covenant amendment, and the direction was to undertake a quantity survey and property assessment. The applicant has provided a quantity survey and is asking that value be provided of approximately $585,000 as a contribution to a reserve fund for future construction of a fire hall for Malahat Fire Department to replace the current requirement in the covenant to build it on site.
Any questions for staff? Director Abbott?
I'm always fascinated, Chair, with fire hall costs. I think I read that it's to allow for a single bay or a single drive-through in the future.
Ms. Pressman?
Through the chair to Director Abbott, that was what was originally anticipated and supported back in 2010, I believe, when the covenant was registered through that rezoning for that development. And at that time, a satellite fire hall would have been supported. With the fire service review that was done a couple of years ago, and with the current situation, as well as other expansions to the fire service area, it's not supported to have a satellite fire hall, rather a more centralized location. And so, so this cost would be transferred towards that instead. But the fire service review was that it could be supported if there was a more central location that could service this area. And this recommendation from staff has been discussed with the fire chief, and they're in support of it as well.
Comfortable with the pricing? I think A, B, or B, C, and C, D, and E are facing a $16 million fire hall. And we've just went and saw a magnificent police station opened up for $47 million. And I'm somewhat gobsmacked at how a 3-bay fire hall is going up in Cowichan Bay. And I would caution staff that is $585,000 enough for future future requirements.
Director Segal, questions for staff. We have the applicant online as well.
I guess this isn't really a question, but through the chair to Director Abbott, this is just to the fund that, yes, the final ticket price will be much higher for the fire hall.
And I'd just like to remind everyone that I'm sure Director Wilson would like if we try and be really succinct and on point on our discussions. This should be a fairly simple thing to proceed with. It's, I think, Area B's. So the applicant is here. Any further questions for staff? Does the applicant have anything that they would like to add?
Yes, I would like to.
Please.
Can you hear me okay?
Go ahead.
I represent the developers. I'm their agent. And we've been working through this for the past 3 years. Started with Frank Limshoe. And the whole thing started when Chief Patterson requested that we don't move ahead with a fire hall. And I should say fire bay is a better way to put it. It's not a true fire hall, but a fire bay construction there because she did not want it there. I consulted with the developer and he said, yes, he would support doing that because either way you're spending the money. And so we started the process. It was supposed to be simple. It got difficult. Frank left, COVID hit, blah, blah, blah. We've been through 4 different planners now, 3 different emergency services people. Anyways, we've got to this point and value was created using a quantity surveyor, a highly respected quantity surveyor in Victoria, their company, Beacon Consulting. And we, with meetings with Michelle and others, we've come up with this value. But I want to stress to the board that it isn't something that the developer requested for the amendment. He was just simply the conduit for your fire chief and your emergency services managers who also did not want it. And so we've provided that opportunity to that area, to that fire department to take the cash in lieu. We have come to an agreement on the amount, keeping in mind the design of this fire hall is back from 2010 because the fire hall design is registered on the covenant. And I think with our negotiations, we come up with a fair amount. And so I don't want anybody on the board here to think that this is a developer trying to skirt something. We are just offering something that was requested of us by your management and your fire chief.
Appreciate the clarification. Any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, turn to alternate Director Champ. Or Director Segal?
I just want to say we would gratefully accept. I move the recommendation.
There's a seconder. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Boyd, next item.
Thank you, Chair. R4, report from the Inspections and Enforcement Division regarding CVRD bylaw 4582, dog regulation and impounding amendment bylaw 2024.
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Chair. There's no presentation. This comes back from the May 1st meeting. My apologies, I couldn't make that meeting. It was my report. And I think this one was predicated by a question by Director Martman about was there other avenues for coming up with the funding for compensation. So I did actually take the time and appreciate with Tracy's help. I have already started the budget for animal control for next year. So it's already, I'm looking at about a 25% increase. Now it's all based on our animal control contract. And on top of that, we also increased dog licensing by $10, which was a significant increase last year per license. So I guess my best way to say this is we've already tapped out the avenue of if we're going to try to do this and add this compensation, it will have to be through requisition. So we don't have another avenue right now.
Any questions for Mr. McDonald? Director Martman.
Thank you, and thank you for staff for going through this, and I really do appreciate also having a bit more time to work through what you've presented. And I guess I would still look through the lens of this is a pro-farmer type of clause in the bylaw. And I'm really reluctant to let it go, but I was thinking about, I'll put this forward. If it gets traction with other directors, I appreciate it. If not, you got some knowledge. Because there's very little available to farmers when a dog comes in and kills their livestock. The example is if you go look at the Livestock Protection Act, they will allow it up to 3/4 of the animal's worth or $750. $750 doesn't get you much if it's a cow or a heifer or a steer. They go for $2,500 to $3,000. So if you read report R6, which I think everybody has done, the average net income of a farmer is $13,000 in CVRD. That's not a lot of margin there to be profitable. So one animal's death is pretty significant if you're looking through the lens of a single farmer. I don't want the property taxpayer to pay for this. I want the dog owner to pay for this. And that dog owner can pay for it, from my perspective, through a fine. So I don't look for requisition to do this, but I look for our bylaws to be such that we license dogs in our area, and we say that if you're more than 4 months and 7 days old as a dog, that you need to have a license. And if people don't license their dogs or do license their dogs, they're still responsible for their dog's behavior. And so I would be looking for bylaws to say, keep this in there, but I think the funding through it should come from an appropriate fine. What happens though is when you can't identify the dog. And so that becomes a complication where I say, well, how do you offset for that funding? And I would look to say, what would be that increment that you would need to do to increase a dog license? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I believe there's about 2,500 dog licenses that are given out every year. We have $90,000 in revenue. And so I just did the rough math, so I could be wrong. But if based on that, that would be 30 cents added to a dog license. And so that would be $35.30 for $750 for a 1-year compensation. So I want to also move it back to the eyes of the farmer, and I know that this maybe came up because we had a farmer that actually put in for this, I believe, last year. And that would be the case of the farmer did get compensation. And so it's rare. Maybe it'll be more used, but I hope not because dog owners are pretty good. But I guess my perspective of, is there a way for us to increase it by 30 cents and people can call this the pro-farmer, piece that adds on to it? And is there a way for us to find the dog owner if identified?
Mr. McDonald.
Two good questions, so I'll start with the first one. As we take direction from the directors, that first question is a possibility. I could add that to next year's budget. Locating the dogs is very difficult, and usually in a case like that, it may be a civil matter between if you do know who the dog is and who the owner is, and the farmer, because it could be quite, a very significant loss. So I'm not sure how I can answer your second question in that aspect. Through fines, I was just looking to see if I brought in my report that I'd printed off, but I don't see what we got in fines last year on this report. So we are already getting fines. It's more for dog off leash, unlicensed dogs and the such.
Director Martman.
How did you know, Chair? So if there's no one else, I'm willing to make a motion that's sort of an adjustment of one of the motions that was put forward by staff. And and I guess my comment, and maybe if there's a seconder, I would speak to how I would look about some future information.
Before you make a motion, I'm feeling like this is a fairly substantial departure from the recommended resolution that's before us, and a request for more information and a different means by which of keeping this program in place. Unless I misread it, the staff are recommending the reduction elimination of the program. So you're suggesting something alternate to this. So can you help us to understand what further information that you want?
Not further information, I would spoke process in the future. I'd be moving option 2, but not with the corresponding requisition increase, but the corresponding license increase. So we would be talking, if it's $750, whatever the appropriate increase in license fees would be. If it's $1,500, whatever the appropriate. But I would be moving $750 to accommodate the potential livestock compensation requests with a corresponding license fee increase. So this is not affecting requisition.
Director Segal, were you seconding that? No. Okay, so do we want to get that motion on the floor? He did move it. It's seconded. Director Segal.
So tell me if this is not the right time for this question, but I believe we removed this compensation from direction from this committee, correct? In a previous meeting. No?
Can you word that a little differently?
Like the compensation for if a farmer has an animal killed, didn't, in a meeting previous to this committee decided to remove that aspect of the bylaw?
To the chair.
Yes, Mr. McDonald.
I am not aware that has ever happened. So in the number of years I've been doing the budget, and we haven't had a request for quite some time for this kind of compensation, and budgets have been getting tighter and tighter, and direction has been given to staff to trim so that was trimmed a long time ago. That it is used so little, and we're in the report it states we're the only one really left that's even doing it basically on the island. CRD is still doing it, but they're going to the council pretty quickly to actually stop doing it as well. It seems to be an old practice. It's not done anymore.
Director Segal.
I agree, but did I make this up? That, I mean, last year we had a farmer with 2 sheep that were killed and they applied for compensation. Right?
Through the chair, I can hopefully straighten out the confusion. So what we had to do is we had to get, because if you go over $500 and it was $750, that requires board approval. So also at that meeting was stated that we didn't have the funding for that because it wasn't budgeted for, so it was a 2-part process there. So also had to prove the funding that we were going to go over budget by approving that as well.
So I'm going to wade in here because I'm really getting a different direction from what I thought we had asked staff to do. So I think staff came to us and said, nobody's doing this anymore. This is an oddball that you're seeing it. There's zero in the budget for the compensation. We recommend you get rid of it. That's what this is. So that's why with Director Bartman's suggestions that it's a completely different direction, because staff are putting this before us to, this is the mechanism by which we get rid of it. Director Bartman saying, no, let's not get rid of it. Let's just figure out a new and innovative way of funding it, which I think is vastly different from the direction that we gave staff to help us to take this off the books. So does that sound vaguely familiar to everyone else around the table? Yeah, that's what So then I would suggest that it's not time sensitive. We're doing budget, that this be referred back to staff and that we have some further discussion as to whether or not this is a useful tool that we want to keep, and we can explore what Director Martman is saying is, because my understanding is it's incredibly difficult to target a revenue source to a revenue expenditure within a regional district. Sounds like a great idea. Provincial government doesn't do it much. I don't know that we can do it. So I think a referral motion to investigate alternative funding for this would be appropriate, but I'm not going to make it. Is this tracking with anybody else, or am I just out here on an island by myself here? Director Martman.
I think we might have individual islands going on right now. Before any referral motion, I think the thing is that the points in the staff's report are valid, but I have a sense that what other regional districts do is information about what other regional districts do. We are all our own regional districts. We make our own decisions. We work on what we do. I'm sure there's some things in regional districts that they do all by themselves with no one else doing it in other regional districts. So I don't, as much due respect, I think that is good information, but it doesn't mean that we have to follow suit. In fact, I think sometimes other regional districts, I know directors come to me and say, why does the CVRD, the farmers there are interested and engaged, ours aren't? And I think, to me, it's because we do things a little differently, perhaps, and I hope differently as we go forward. Anyways, I guess my perspective is I don't mind this being referred, but the process that I think this should go through is it should go through some farmers. And that's the thing that I think that in the end, if you're going to have something that you say to, in fact, a farmer, if farmers come forward and say, hey, we don't want this, then I think that's very informative. But if they go like, this is very helpful. I'd also like to see more information, if this is for staff, if we refer this, about how to avoid double dipping, because that would be, inappropriate. And so is there a way to say that you must go through the Livestock Protection Act first, and if there's any residual amount, then that comes back through the CBRD. So I'd be open for the referral if that's the case.
Okay, first of all, Chair needs clarification as to what's on the table.
We have moved and seconded option 2 with the removal of requisition to license fee increase.
Okay, so here's where I sit on this. This is where the chair thinks that we are positioned. Director Martman, the motion on the floor is an alternative to the what staff have recommended. If committee agrees that with the direction that the motion dictates, then support the motion. If the committee disagrees and wants to proceed with the original direction that we gave staff, then defeat the motion, and the motion as recommended can be put on the table. Or there can be a referral motion at this time and we can not discuss any of this. So we have a motion on the floor. I put to committee. Are there any referral motions? Director Nicholson.
I actually have a question. May I ask it?
Please.
What does North Cowichan do?
My understanding, North Cowichan has not done this for 30 years. They dropped this program quite some time ago.
Director Scull.
I'd make the referral motion to get more information, to understand if the fine option is.
Targeted funding.
Yeah, like if
yada,
that's
yada.
possible, and then contemplate that next time it comes.
Staff understand the nature of the referral. Is there a seconder? Did you just second that? You just seconded that. So, referral motion on the table. Any further discussion required? Call a question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Referral motion carries. Mr. Postings, you gonna get up to the lectern? We gotta get you on video for at least one shot. Welcome back, everyone. I believe we are now on R5. Ms. Boyd, what do you got for us next?
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Fire Services Division regarding budget amendment function 351, required radio upgrade.
Mr. Postings, would you like to tell us about this one?
Thank you, Chair. At this point in time, the report hopefully does explain what we're looking for in the sense of the fire service relating to some radio replacement. Unfortunately, our staff are unavailable today, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions if there are relating to the report.
Director Nicholson.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded. Yeah, this is much needed and would appreciate your support. Any questions online? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Postings. We go to R6.
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Community Planning Division regarding comprehensive zoning amendment, zoning bylaw, agricultural zoning regulations.
Okay, we had a team of staff. Oh, there they are.
I do have to apologize. Bev stepped out for a moment and she's leading the presentation. So I hate to ask, would you mind going to R7? Is that possible?
I guess we can.
I can, or give me 2 minutes to find her?
Somebody send out a search party.
I know. If you give me 2 minutes, I can also run down.
Mr. Chair, this is quite important. I think we should get on with this one.
Yeah, well, we need to have the project lead here, Director Wilson, and we are sending out people to find the project lead, so bear with us.
Suggest we take a 2-minute?
I think
Already
we
here.
should just wait
Okay.
here until they find her. I know.
And Mr. Chair, in the absence of being able to find her, considering the input we've had so far, I'm quite happy to put forward a motion that we refer this back until further consultation with the farming community.
In due respect, Chair, I do think staff should present.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to hear from staff here because we've had input from the public. I think that we should be updated on the current course of work as Ms. Suderman walks up to the microphone as I speak.
I am so sorry. That was the shortest 5 minutes in the history of the world.
Yes, we altered the rules of physics in here. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for having us here today to present the agricultural zone, the draft agricultural zone, for your information. I have to catch my breath. And to outline plans for consulting with the agricultural community about the draft zoning proposal. As you're aware, the Community Planning Division is undertaking a comprehensive zoning bylaw project, which is meant to harmonize and modernize zoning within the region's electoral areas. This is crazy. Reducing the number of zoning bylaws in the region from 9 till 2. The marine areas will be covered in a separate bylaw. This is a massive undertaking, and as a first step, we have drafted new general regulations for agriculture and propose to reduce the number of agricultural zones from 36 to 1. Yes, 1. Zoning must be consistent with the official community plan. As the committee is aware, the Strategic Initiatives Division is working on a modernized OCP at this time, and the hope is that the timing of the new OCP will provide the opportunity for the new harmonized and modernized zoning bylaw to be consistent with it. Agricultural zoning must also be consistent with the Agricultural Land Reserve regulations. Essentially, ALR lands within the CVRD have 2 levels of zoning on them. So the zoning developed by the CVRD must be consistent with those regulations, some of which provide discretion for the CVRD as to how those land uses will be regulated on ALR properties. Our goals in developing the agricultural zones, in addition to being consistent with the OCP and the ALR regulations, include protecting the agricultural land base for agricultural purposes. In other words, preventing the conversion of these lands into essentially residential estates, and supporting the economic viability of farms. We propose to protect the agricultural land base by having consistent minimum parcel sizes throughout the unincorporated areas of the region that reduces the likelihood of subdivision on these lands, and implementing a home plate approach to the placement of non-agricultural structures on agricultural lands. We propose to support the economic viability of farms by allowing for more permitted uses on farms, although of course these uses would still be subject to constraints such as availability of water and on-site wastewater treatment capability. These uses may have been distributed between all of the existing zoning bylaws in the past, but will now be consolidated into one. For example, uses permitted in Area B agricultural zoning right now, for example, would be permitted in all electoral areas with agricultural lands. A second way that we're supporting the economic viability of farms is through proposing to reduce the setbacks for most agricultural uses, particularly when the uses are adjacent to other agriculturally zoned properties. We're also ensuring that it's clear which of the proposed uses are principal uses and which are accessory uses. In other words, one of the principal uses needs to be in place before accessory uses are permitted. Next slide, please. We're showing you this slide, not because we're going to go over it in detail, because I realize it's illegible at this scale, but to give you an idea of how we're proposing to structure the new zoning bylaw using tables and other methods to make it easier to understand the uses permitted on the various similar zones and how they may differ from each other. Next slide, please. We're also expecting that there will be a variety of site-specific uses that are not permitted within current zoning bylaws, or that may become legal non-conforming uses after this zoning bylaw is approved. Certainly, this is the case for the agricultural land use designations and zoning. For example, there was a time when golf courses were a permitted use on ALR lands, but no more. However, the golf courses are still there. Therefore, to ensure clarity about site-specific uses, we intend to create tables within the new zoning bylaw that identify these uses for clarity as to their legality. Next slide, please. So back to the specifics of the agricultural zones and zoning regulations. The changes that we are proposing will require scrutiny by farmers and landowners of the affected lands, as well as the agencies that are responsible for the stewardship of agriculture within the province. So in this regard, Ms. Papadopoulos's comments are well taken. Community planning is proposing a comprehensive, if not extensive, consultation schedule that seeks the views of planners and others within the CVRD who will be working closely with these regulations once adopted, the provincial agencies with responsibility for supporting agriculture, and the community more broadly, as represented by the CVRD's advisory planning commissions, farmers, and the agricultural community, as well as the general public. In other words, landowners that are not farmers who may be affected by the changes in the regulations. Next slide, please. We're proposing to undertake a mix of online and in-person activities to consult with the affected groups in the period from July through October 2024. We expect to hold up to 7 meetings in person and have the online information available in advance of those meetings. Community Planning is proposing to work closely with the CVRD's Communications Division to generate awareness through social media about the consultation process and the availability of the online survey. We will also be using standard communication channels for sending out agency review requests and for inviting agricultural groups to host meetings. Next slide, please. This report presents 3 options for the committee's consideration, of which option 1 is recommended. No additional budget is requested for this project as it was already budgeted for in the 2024 Function 325 or Community Planning budget. This budget doesn't represent staff time on the project, but it represents communications and meeting costs as well as consultant costs. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Oh, there's the resolution.
Thank you, Ms. Suderman. Now you can breathe.
Yes.
I'm going to talk for a moment here. So I will recognize that there's been a referral motion put on the floor and duly seconded. In regards to that, I just want to review the timelines as I've heard and observed, in that we had staff before us just very recently giving us a fairly robust and aggressive timeline, in which this was brought forward for priority, and here it is before us. I note that the timeline in the presentation we've had takes into account the consultation with the farming community outside of their busiest season in October, I believe. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that when our normal process for implementing and developing a document such as this involves a starting point, which I think staff have produced, and then we take that out and engage with the community on those particular items. This recommendation that is before us, and I know we've got the referral motion on the floor, is the endorsement of the plan to move forward with something to work from that staff have produced, that we can now engage with the community, the farming community, and the likes. So it's my observation that we've, staff have responded to the committee's request that this be brought forward. My view is that the referral motion, as it's been put and is on the floor now, actually says sort of hurry up and wait. That we would go backwards and then go out to the community in a different timeline, different format. So I'm acknowledging that what staff has put forward is a normal procedure for developing a document like this, and it makes sense from where I sit. Now, I'm not an area with a great deal of farmland in it, and so I would just ask committee to consider those points, and I'm going to allow for a little bit of leeway in that the referral motion is only debatable on the point of propriety of referral, but I think it's important that we proceed with due haste on this, and that, in my view, a referral motion is actually slowing the process. So with that, I turn to committee and ask for comments. I'll go Director Abbott. Okay, Director Wilson, we'll let you go first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, and I hear words like aggressive timetables and hurry up and wait and things like that. And it's funny, you know, because from what I saw of the slideshow there, the Agricultural Committee seems to be way after everybody else has been consulted. Now, one of the emails which came through to us, which I forwarded to the rest of the committee, and I omitted to put that to Legislative Services as well, but it says in there that the farmers brought a lot of concerns towards this study a year ago, and they appear to not have been taken very seriously on this. I can read the words if you like. I am in favor of sending this back for furthers because I would like to see the farmers consulted more and given more priority than they appear to have had so far. Farming is one of the most important things that we have. We're seeing a reduction in the farmlands, we're seeing a reduction in the amount of food that we are producing ourselves, and we're seeing a reduction in the amount of people who can take over the farms. What we don't want to do is restrict this further, and that's what a lot of the farmers who I've spoken to who have contacted me seems to be happening. So I would like to see more priority given to the farmers, get the feedback and use that, then move forward. We can be aggressive, of course we can, but let's give the farmers, the people this affects the most input so that they can carry on with the work that they do.
Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. I would maybe like to correct you. The farmers that I've spoken to within the last couple of days have said that November through February is the best time for them to be consulted. So we missed that window last year. It's laudable that we have members of the community here today, but they can't attend and wait for this agenda item to hit the table, nor can they necessarily find time. That's one thing. The other is there's been, and maybe I shouldn't be delving into the weeds, but it's laudable the number of definitions. They've talked about cannabis, they've talked about alcohol, they've talked about all sorts of things that you can do and uses. I noticed that there's no mention of dairy processing, and I'd encourage the ag planners to get dairy processing as one of the products that needs to be produced. It just adds a little bit more definition to what it's not necessarily just home-based. And finally, I'm a little concerned, and maybe others are, that yes, we don't want to see large real estate properties, estates, but 40 hectares is just about 100 acres, and from the sounds of it, we're seeing that nothing can be subdivided below 100 acres. That's a bit of a moratorium on any further subdivisions, in my estimation, on ag lands within the CVRD.
Thank you, Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair, and I guess I'm really wanting to speak just that we have a referral motion on the floor, and I'm trying to understand how I should vote on that when I don't have a chance to ask staff some questions, because I do want to ask some questions.
I think I indicated that we're going to have some leeway on the
So I can ask
propriety of referral, so sure. Ms. Suderman, would you like to jump up to the microphone, please? Director Martman has some questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to ask some questions, because I read through this a couple of times actually, and I know when we met last year with the farmers that they had a number of questions and there's concerns, and there was a prior meeting to the CVRD meeting too that they sent in a number of things. And I guess the question is that because these aren't incorporated in here at this point, is that from a staff perspective strategic? Is there a reason to do that in terms of when you send it out to referrals, you want to have them look at a more basic level or a farmer-informed level, or was it not even thought through like that? I'm just curious.
Of course, we thought it through very carefully. Thank you very much for allowing me to reassure you on that point.
Oops, sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, it's complex. There are 36 different zones, as I mentioned earlier. There's the ALR regulations and so on. There is the input from the previous farmers meeting. There's the input from the CVRD's meeting, the consultation on no official community plan. There's Ione Smith's Uplands Consulting Report with recommendations for zoning and for the official community plan. That being said, it is better from a strategic point of view to take out a basic zone and get the farmers and other people to tell us specifically what needs to go in, rather than us going out and suggesting all kinds of things that could be included in the zoning regulations and bylaws and then taking them out. because there isn't support for them or whatever, but some people would have supported it. So it is better from a consultation point of view that we start with something more basic and move up from there. But we have certainly heard what the farmers had to say in the past. I will also say, though, that a lot of the things that the farmers want are actually quite controversial. For instance, worker housing for farm workers. There's all kinds of questions around that, just to give you a sense of the complexity of it, around, well, is that temporary housing because they're temporary farm workers? And if it's temporary housing, then what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that we're allowing people to live in RVs on a seasonal basis? So these things all come into it. Are they foreign workers who are coming in? It's my understanding there are a number of farmers in the region now that are bringing in foreign workers, which means they have federal housing standards that they have to meet. So there's quite a lot of complexity to a number of the things that the farmers have been asking for specifically. Another concern, for example, around agritourism accommodation. Well, agritourism accommodation is meant to be specifically for agritourism activities. So does it need to be permanent accommodations, or is it temporary accommodations for those kinds of things? Are the activities that are happening on farms actually agritourism, or are they just miscellaneous economic development activities on a farm? So there's a whole variety of considerations that come into it, and deep down our ultimate goal is to protect, per Reed Bailey's presentation to the Committee of the Whole a couple of weeks ago, to protect the agricultural land base, specifically the soils, because once land is converted to any kind of residential use or industrial use on those agricultural lands, that soil is gone forever.
Follow-up, Director Marvin.
Thank you, and yes, I do expect staff to look at it from many different levels. I guess from my perspective, and this is, based on what I've heard and also based on my perspective as a farmer, would there have been a problem starting with the basic of saying, this is what the ALC, this is what the Agricultural Land Reserve Act permits, and then build from there, rather than sort of ALC plus some local government ideas, and then let that sort of organically grow, rather than having the layers on already of local government?
Do you want to take that, Ms. Suderman?
I think I understand the question. So one of the challenges that we're facing within the CVRD is that we have agriculturally designated lands that are not within the ALR. So the question then becomes whether the uses that are going to be on the agriculturally designated lands outside of the ALR, are they going to be more restrictive, or are they going to be less restrictive than what the ALR permits? So, and then the other consideration that we have as planners is that the lawyers tell us that we should not duplicate things. So if the ALR says that this is outright use, which is why there's that phrase in there saying other uses as permitted by the agricultural land use regulation, then we try and balance that out as well, to try not to duplicate, because the challenge becomes if we list all those things individually, then when the agricultural land use regulation changes at the provincial level, then our bylaw is out of date automatically. So we try and cover some of those things with those kind of generic statements. I don't know if that answered your question.
Sure, and I'm going to suggest that we try not to get too deep into this, and the reason I'm saying that is that we're governance, and we have professional planners, and yes, you have specific expertise and knowledge in this area, but we have to remember that we do rely on the methodology and the training of our professional staff, and everybody appreciates the specific and unique perspective you bring to this, but let's everybody remember that we have divisions of labor here, and so with that, please continue with your final remarks.
well, one more this round, right? So I guess the piece, and this is more, so moving back to process. And this is a piece that I really sort of bump up against. Because if you hear from a group of farmers through, whether it's CVRD led or not, and you know that you're going to go back out and consult them again, and you don't include some of the thoughts that they have, then what was the value of doing that? Like, it seems to be that, are they going to re-engage with you or with us? I don't want to make it them and us, but will they re-engage versus saying, you know, we've heard and there's some things here that just, yeah, let's put this in there and see where it goes.
Ms. Suderman?
Thank you for that. I think I'm going to answer that in two ways. One is that Lauren and I were looking at the report from the Keating Farm meeting that took place just earlier today. And one of the things specifically came up, there was a discussion, and the results in the report said 33% were in favor of it, 33% were opposed, and 33% didn't have an opinion. And so my experience in working with the farming community is that it's very difficult to get consensus, and that is because of the diversity within the farming community itself. The needs of a dairy farmer, and the needs of an orchardist, and the needs of a grain farmer, and the needs of a subsistence farmer are very different. And so it's very difficult, the needs of a farmer who has 2 hectares and has to make $10,000 a year to maintain farm status are different from the needs of a farmer on a larger piece of land who only needs to make $2,500 to maintain farm status. So the farming community is extremely diverse. It would be very hard to get consensus on anything within the farming community. And so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is that we've asked you for permission to go out and consult. The materials that you have in front of you are not entirely the consultation package. There's also an online survey that asks questions about the zoning bylaw and how people are responding to the specific points that we're making there. There will be background information available in advance of the community consultations about what all things have been taken into account and so on and so forth. So,
Thank you, Ms. Suderman. Director Segal.
Thank you. Yeah, so much going on here with this referral motion, which I don't fully understand. It's a referral motion to engage the ag community, but the recommended resolution was to engage community. I do want to say, I mean, because I've been involved before I was elected in giving feedback on the OCP, and just every question I had was, that's for the zoning bylaw. So I recognize the excitement of finally getting to the zoning bylaw. And I can also understand how over the multi-year process we've been going through that comments that apply to a zoning bylaw when we're not working on the zoning bylaw yet maybe don't make it through. So, I mean, I'm just so excited that we're at a place where we get to engage the community on the zoning bylaw. My question is though, last week we gave direction around an agricultural advisory committee. How does that fit in, or does that take a long time to set up?
Ms. Trill.
Chair, through you to the other chair, vice chair. Director Segal, I'm sorry. So there was a report that went to committee of the whole that was essentially referred for discussion after completion of a couple of major initiatives. One is decisions around regional planning, and the other was around completion of the economic development strategy. So there will be a report that comes back once those initiatives are resolved. And if I could just follow up to the direction around how these sort of bylaws get developed and
where they come from, where the inspiration comes from, and the inspiration comes from the official community plan. So you have a electoral areas official community plan, you have a draft modernized official community plan, and I would strongly encourage that you look at the agricultural policies within that draft modernized official community plan, because they support the measures that are proposed through implementing bylaws, specifically with regards to home plating and subdivision and other measures that are proposed. So, so staff are seeking to, to do what, has been recommended, and that is to broadly consult with the community, which obviously includes the key stakeholders and others, and would really like the opportunity to do that. Thanks.
Director Segal.
So then I'd just like to say I really appreciated the presentation from Ms. Suderman. Really looks like robust community engagement that I think we should not delay.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I have a question for Bev related to this. I'm not really clear how it applies to farms that aren't in the ALR. So you have to be zoned A, agriculture, and then that it'll apply the same way, or?
Yeah, so the proposed A zone for agriculture is meant to cover all the properties that are currently in the ALR, as well as all of those properties outside of the ALR that are designated agriculture under the official community plan.
Under the official community plan. And so then what happens to farms that don't meet either of those criteria?
That is a very good question, and one that Lauren and I have not wrestled with fully yet, because there are many rural residentially zoned properties at this time that allow agriculture, and where agriculture is a primary use.
Yeah, a lot of forestry ones, yeah. I'm just going to switch back to this issue of process. And I am concerned about the way we've handled this. If I recall, it was last June. Was it last June? Yeah. It was last June that some farmers in my area organized a meeting of their own to talk with other farmers, and they cast far and wide, and we had a huge turnout at the hub to talk about how they should pay attention to this process, and how they should make sure that they're providing good input into the zoning regulations. And then, and there was a summary of that meeting that was provided to staff. And then we had in September, or I think it was September or October, we had a CVRD sponsored meeting where Ione, who had written our policy report, she facilitated a meeting of farmers, so there were a lot of farmers there as well. And there was a lot of frustration at that meeting because they really wanted to talk about the specifics, and that really didn't happen. And so we have a community that's incredibly engaged and would like to provide input, and yet we've then not taken what we've been hearing, and I think put it in a format that would allow us to work with them to end up with a good product. So I am very concerned now that we're proposing to go out to the community with what we've created, and then talk to the farmers at the end of that process again, which doesn't leave a lot of room to maybe really rejig that if we end up needing to do that. So, and I get that the timing is really bad again, because here it is summer, and farmers have already spent last summer worrying about this, and now we're asking them to do that again. So I don't know what the solution to this is, but I don't think this is good process, and I think that we should be doing a whole lot better, particularly when we have a community that has asked us to listen to them and really cares about it. And I know that in my area, it is a strong farming community. There's a lot of ALR. And I know in Director Martman's community, that's the same thing. And I think that if you don't have a lot of agricultural areas in your area, then you may not appreciate how important this is to that particular community, who are really hurting. This whole climate change thing is having a huge impact on farmers' ability to be economically viable. And so there's lots of stresses, and it would just seem to me that we should be reaching out to try and support and help and get a really good zoning bylaw that supports farmers and does what Ms. Suderman said the goals were, which I agree with those goals. So I'm not sure what the way forward is at this point, but I definitely don't want us to go out with this as sort of like, it just doesn't seem to me to be respectful to go out with what we've produced when it seems to be contrary to what we have been hearing all along. So I'm not sure what to do.
Thank you for that. So there's, I think, a fundamental challenge here, and I think I heard Ms. Suderman address this earlier, and it also has to do with the specificity of our roles. And our roles are of, and I'm repeating myself, but are of governance and of process, as Director Nicholson has stated. And I'm hearing, and we've gone way beyond the bounds of what I thought we would be discussing around a referral motion, but what I'm hearing is a lot more of what and not how. And I don't think it's our time for the what. That's the staff, the stakeholder groups, the farmers. That is more their bailiwick. And what I heard Ms. Suderman say is that this is thoughtful and planned, that the document that has been produced that they will be going out to community with will be a base document that has the potential to be added to, as opposed to a fulsome document that we would have, they would have to undergo the exercise to mine us from. So what I see before us right now is, unfortunately, we had a referral motion right at the beginning, and we will have to vote on the referral motion. I view the referral motion as potential of delaying this process when it was just very recently that we told staff we wanted to expedite this process. So I think we have essentially two paths that I see that we can take. We can pass the referral motion, and I think that will ultimately end up with the effect of delaying things, or we can defeat the referral motion and move forward with the staff recommended resolution, with them clearly hearing from not only us, but the people that have come and provided input to us, that they want, for lack of a better term, more. So that's how I sort of encapsulate and sum up what I see is where we're at right at this moment. So I will go to Director McClinton, who hasn't spoken. I will go to Director Wilson to close, and then we will contemplate the referral motion next. Director McClinton.
Yeah, you mostly beat me to it. I won't be supporting the referral motion, and I will be supporting the staff recommendation to seek more engagement, and was going to ask if we called a question, but I think it's good if let Mike to close.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't think this is about what we want. This is about what the community wants. And this is something that they've made quite clear to us, that they need more consultation. I think Director Nicholson made the good points there as well, the same as the rest of it. These are the farmers, these are the people. I hope I will not be upset, if that's the right word, if this referral motion fails. But I think you've already said that that the staff will include the farmers going forward. We need to make sure that they are heard again, and everything else that goes with it. If we can have that assurance, then fair enough, let's move ahead, but they need to be heard. Thank you.
For one last remark from Director Martin.
Thank you. Staff mentioned that farmers are hard to get them to agree on one thing, but I think if we don't refer this back, they will probably all agree on one thing about what the CVRD is doing. And so I just would want to get this, it's like a dance. If you don't start off with the first step together, it never seems to get together. And so I want to get that first step off done right. I have a hope it doesn't delay. I'm hoping there's a cushion where in 2 weeks it can come back and we can look at this maybe through a different lens or through a lens that's able to satisfy not all parties, but satisfy some of those things and start that dance together. Thank you.
All right, everyone, I'm going to call the question on referral. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion's defeated. Is there another motion to be put? Moved by Director Segal. What is that?
I'd move the recommended resolution to move forward with community engagement.
Is there a seconder? It's been seconded. Discussion on the motion. Director Martin.
I'd like to make an amendment to that motion in that the farming community be moved, one of the meetings of the farming community, because I think there's 3, be moved to the front.
We have an amendment that the one of the meetings with the farming community be moved to the front, and it's been seconded. Look on screen, seeing no comments on the amendment. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Look to the main motion. Any comments on the main amended motion? Director Segal.
I just wanted to share that I recognize that the draft is not perfect and not well received at this time. But of all I got many emails and texts and things today, and the main call from every single one of them was that they wanted public engagement. So I see this as that important step.
All right, I'm going to call the question on the amended motion. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Again, that resolution goes to the board meeting a week today. Ms. Boyd, what do we got next? Director Nicholson.
I'd also like to make a comment on this. It would be good to understand where North Cowichan is going with their agricultural zonings, which I believe they're reviewing right now, because the more consistent we can be across the farming community in this region, the better.
Thank you. Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Chair. We're moving to R7, report from the Inspections and Enforcement Division regarding business licensing for short-term rentals and bed and breakfast businesses.
Another easy one. We should give Mr. McDonald a bar stool so he can sit up there longer.
Bear with me as I'm trying something new here. Okay. So this report's been in front of you before, and it's now coming back. So what I thought I would focus on, originally I was going to do a PowerPoint, I was just going to jump right into it, but I decided I would run a short PowerPoint just to maybe capture some key points. So first, I thought we would start with, hope that my computer works. What's going on here? Oh, there we go. Whoops, let's go back. How about the goal? And this is the goal apparently from last night. However, the goal for today, go Canada, is business licensing. So the big 3 keys here are health and safety monitoring and an enforcement tool. So under health and safety, as I was doing my research, I started looking at other places, municipalities mostly doing business licensing already, who are also already doing Airbnb and short-term rental business licensing. And one of the things I recognized right away was safety things that they had that we've never even entertained. We've never done inspections. We've just assumed that even in a bed and breakfast, that these bed and breakfasts are just operating and they're within the guise of our bylaws. But we've never actually gone on site to check, are they actually compliant? So business licenses gives us a real good opportunity to actually do either an annual inspection or at least one before we were to say to issue a license. The other thing that I saw all these other places doing, they're requiring a safety plan. And this is similar to, say, a hotel. When you go into a hotel, you see it posted right on the door. And you think if you're going to go to a short-term rental, you've never been in the house before, you're new there, how do you know your way around? So I thought, when I started seeing some of these ideas, I thought these were fantastic ideas. Further, that's falls somewhat under health and safety would be, I've written additional regulations. Now, these additional regulations, they can pretty much be anything, and I'd probably bring this more forward if this gets traction and I start to formulate the bylaw itself. Because within that bylaw, you can add additional regulations that aren't in the zoning regulation. And what I saw other communities doing were things like limiting parking, limiting a number of bedrooms that they were allowed to use, times of year. There was all kinds of options available to them. Not suggesting at this point that you're going down any of those roads, but just to know that those options are available. Another thing was the monitoring. And so this would allow us to know where they all were, which we don't now. How many, which we're not sure on that one either. And the opportunity for ongoing compliance. So that where I went back to say is, with ongoing compliance, this could mean that should somebody come out of compliance for any reason, we wouldn't renew their business license. There's some opportunities there. So if somebody's got a license for their bed and breakfast and they've come out of compliance in some other way, we could have it written into the bylaw that you must be in full compliance in order to renew your license. So just another additional tool. Under enforcement, there's going to be this sharing agreement. Now, the sharing agreement, I haven't actually seen it yet, but we know it's coming. It's one of the biggest tools we were looking for enforcement. We even heard Bill 35. So it's going to be a registry that shows up. If you have business licensing, you're basically going to be a preferred customer and get quicker access to this. And this is supposed to be updated monthly. It's going to have all kinds of information that would be important to bylaw. And as we're also looking to go to a bond system where we don't actually have to serve the person, we just have to know where they live, meaning that it's, say, the person who has the non-compliant, or we came into non-compliance or trying to issue a fine, and they live in Vancouver, we can just mail it to them. So again, this is another, we were quite excited when we saw this possibility of this tool. Another one that I've come across is the ability to fine for advertising. And why this becomes really important is what the province is targeting is verbal and Airbnb. But already I've seen people trying to figure a way around this, and it wasn't hard to figure this one out. So they're not really monitoring marketplace, but beyond marketplace, we're starting to see where clients are just doing their own webpage. So that's not going to get captured by the province. So it's an easy one for us to enforce, easy one for us to write a ticket to, got all the evidence we need right there. And again, I've written here with no other compliance issues. So again, it's just another tool there. I also wanted to reiterate, because I know there, when I presented prior, just to make understand this actually is just short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts. And there is the recommended resolution.
Director Martin.
So I've had some feedback on business licenses in my area, and actually surprisingly, it's positive. That if it gets a handle and actually gives some data on what bed and breakfasts are, and I think people get the idea of short-term rentals, and it might be painful for some people. But the question I have is about, I think this is their general concern, what's it going to cost them? So is this revenue net neutral, requisition zero kind of service?
Through the chair. The target is it would be paid for by the business licensing costs themselves. It was to be revenue neutral. That's our goal.
Director Segal.
Thanks. I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Mr. McDonald, or for planning staff, but just Can we get clarity on the difference between the short-term rental and the bed and breakfast allowances within the zoning?
I can do my best to answer that question. So bed and breakfast doesn't have a kitchen. It's in essence just, and for the most part, and not in every case, so I'm going to say, just to simplify it, it's basically just a bedroom. So it's transient guests come by, and generally there's nothing even after, not even lunch. It is literally a bed and breakfast. I've stayed with myself in Scotland, and it's quite enjoyable, actually. So the short-term rental, it's typically going to be a dwelling. And that's, so I'm going to go from the extreme to extreme to make you understand. So, and what we're seeing is that's what people are doing. And what the Bill 35 was trying to do is stop a lot of the short-term rentals to free up long-term rental stock. So one of the reasons we were also looking at licensing and tickets and things that we're looking at there and enforcement would be, we're only aware, I think, of less than 100 properties in the CBRD that can actually legally have a short-term rental.
Yeah, I know it's really not a lot that are allowed to have the short-term rentals, but is there a lot that would be allowed to have bed and breakfasts? Like, do we have an idea on that?
Again, through the chair, it's not a planning question, but from what I understand, yes. I know I did my initial research and working with Mr. Tippett that I think just about most of the zones, if not all the zones, allow the actual bed and breakfast.
I think almost every residential zone, the bed and breakfast is a permitted use.
Yeah.
Which none of the other ones were. Yes, correct.
Thank you.
And Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I think I have a different take on this. I think we've managed quite well with bed and breakfasts without licensing. There are just a handful of short-term rentals that are allowed to exist. And I would prefer, before we potentially go down a road which will cost the taxpayers money over time, that we wait and see how the sharing agreement rolls out and find out whether it's really going to be to our advantage to go down this road. Yeah, I think we've got other more important things to be focusing our resources on.
Through the chair.
Mr. McDonald.
So I think our main focus isn't even on the short-term rentals. It actually is on the bed and breakfast. We've actually come across a couple that we found a lot of safety infractions just from doing enforcement. So had we had business licensing, these issues wouldn't have come up in the first place. So we really looked at it as a tool, and that's why I tried to emphasize and even put the order of my slides together that we're really focusing on health and safety with this licensing. So we hope it to be cost neutral, but like I say, we really see the benefit in health and safety.
Director Martman, I've got myself on the list as well.
Sorry, I'm going around that. Sorry, that's a bit confusing to me. Not in the health and safety part. Just Director Nicholson's question sort of triggered, because my understanding is that without a business license, you can't track who has an infraction when they advertise. Unless you can somehow match the advertising to a data bank that says these properties aren't permitted. Like, I thought the business license was integral to the monitoring of the infraction of the short-term rental.
Through the chair, if I understand the question, so it was a real challenging thing to even understand what the province was up to when they first introduced it. And I really had to wrap my head around what was going to happen with business licensing, because they said you had to have it. And I was looking at going, so I even sent some emails to the province saying, can I get clarification? Because I also wondered how they were going to enforce it on, say, if the regional district or any other regional district who doesn't have business licensing. So what ends up happening is they said, first, good question. And I said, so what I was looking at, they were going to go after these Airbnb, Vrbo and Airbnb if people advertise. So I said, well, what happens, they don't have the business license, but we don't require it. But I said, what happens if it's not compliant with zoning? And once again, they said, good question, weren't sure what they were going to do with that. So for us, if we have the business licensing, then we have the tools, and we know where we stand, and then it allows us to go after it in a very clear way. And I think the best way for us is probably with the business licensing and the ability to go after ticketing for advertising. Because that's, if you don't advertise, chances are they're probably not going to get rented out very much.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I'm going to share a short story in that an individual when he'd heard that, individual in my area heard that I was supportive of a lot of the Bill 35 initiatives and the short-term rental initiatives and the desire to convert many of the illegal short-term rentals that were proliferating. And, I've heard elected officials from Campbell River who have family in my area say that on the waterfront, every second property is a short-term rental. And, we've really been struggling with the ability for families to locate in our community and populate our fire departments and the like. But it's one particular individual who was, he was pretty furious with me when he was discussing the whole idea of regulating and monitoring and the business license program. And when we actually got down to discussing the activity that he was engaged in, he was operating a bed and breakfast lawfully in the community. And he was really quite proud of the fact, he thought he was going to have to end the rentals to people in the movie industry and biologists that were working on data collection in the lake. And he was engaging in this 11 months out of the year. And when he found out that he was actually operating a lawful bed and breakfast, he was thrilled and had no hesitation whatsoever of being of joining a registry, hanging a shingle outside saying that he was now a lawful bed and breakfast. And the curious thing was that he actually then went on to say, but when my wife and I go to Hawaii for a month in December, can we still continue to operate our short-term rental? Which, of course, if he's not resident under the regulations, I don't think that would be an appropriate use. Well, he's not there operating his bed and breakfast. Long story short, there has been an awful lot of resistance to the idea of business licenses in the community as a general business license. This, I've been hearing nothing but positive comments from people saying, yes, if they're going to be operating, we want to know that they're operating correctly, and the oversight that the provincial regime is going to bring to this in conjunction with what it'll enable our staff to do, I think is kind of a win-win situation. So I'm fully supportive of this because the short-term rental crisis in my area has really exacerbated the housing crisis in my area, and our area has been, or the Cowichan Lake area has been historically a place where people have been able to move their families and to be able to afford to put a roof over their head. And those are days long gone by, and I'd like to see them return. So with that, where are we at with this, Ms. Boyd?
Mr. Chair, if I could just interrupt, please. I have to leave now.
Oh, do you have a final comment then before you leave?
No, I think it's all been said.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Director Deck.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering about the electoral approval, how that would work, or elector approval for the adoption.
I may forward that question through to Ms. Boyd if she would like to answer, as that's generally a legislative services question.
Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question. So the what you're referring to is the AAP, alternate approval process, and this is where it's currently going on as well with the Shawnigan Waterworks purchase, whereas the applicants, we will go out to the public and inform them of this proposed service establishment bylaw and regulatory bylaw. And if they are opposed to it, they will submit a petition against it.
Thanks very much.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So I'd like to go back to this issue of revenue neutral. So we have approved in the 2024 budget a one-year full-time bylaw officer position to focus on enforcement of uncompliant STRs. So my thinking is that if we go down this road too quickly, I really think we should take it slowly and watch and see what happens. Because I think what will happen is if we actually get the AAP approved and we have business licensing, it's going to be very difficult to not continue to have this full-time bylaw officer, so that's another staff person. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I got a lot of pushback on budgeting and taxation. And from my perspective, this isn't, we already took the initial step with in most of our areas, I think, of going down this road of monitoring STRs and not allowing them. So I think we really should just pause and watch what happens over the next year and then come back and take a look at it then. Yeah, I'm concerned about the costs.
Director Segal,
I'll move the recommended resolution.
do we have a second? Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? One opposed, the motion carries. That will go through to next week's board as well.
I was opposed.
Thank you. We have R8 general housing options, and I just heard somebody say that maybe a short break would be a good idea. Director Wilson has departed, so let's say 4:05 will return and do the last stretch run. We're reading up on the screen every once in a while too. Welcome, Director Stone, Chair Stone.
Hi, I've been listening the whole time. I've just been on my phone, so just listening in intently. Thanks, Ian.
Glad you could join us. Welcome back, everyone. I'm sure we're all chipper and refueled and ready to go. Ms. Boyd, what are we on next?
Thank you, Chair. R8, report from the General Manager, Land Use Services Department regarding housing options.
Ms. Churulf, welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for being so patient.
I do have a presentation. I'll attempt to get started here. Okay, is that streaming at home? Yes?
Can folks at home see it?
Okay.
I cannot.
Oh, maybe I should be on.
Can Director McClinton see my presentation?
Jesse, can you see it?
No.
No?
I did something wrong then.
Uh-oh.
There. See? And
No.
then there.
Oh, there we go.
How is that?
Wow,
Okay, we'll have to go back here.
that's a cantilever. Huh. Yeah.
Now we have to go back. Hang on.
Arrow up.
I'm arrowing and
Are we a
nothing's
funny
happening.
bunch?
I'll figure this out at some point. Yeah, just a second. Just a second. Why won't it? Can you advance it?
No, that's
Okay, this is fine. I may not be able to advance slides. We're gonna find out. All you're missing from this is the outline, which was to talk about the challenge and essentially local government options specific to electoral areas. And so I I don't think any of this is new information. You're dealing with a situation where you have high demand for housing, limited supply. We have, particularly on Vancouver Island and in the region, significant geographic constraints. Lots of areas of floodplains or steep slopes, riparian areas. There's a lot of pressure from foreign investors and from people coming from other parts of the country. Income disparities, so what people earn relative to the cost of housing. A lack of affordable rental options. We know that there's some pressure on the rental market from short-term rentals. Most people in the public will probably say there are regulatory barriers, and of course we agree with that because, particularly for electoral areas, it's not just the CBRD that you have to deal with if you're building, it's other government agencies. And at some point in time, I'll be able to, there we go. Okay, so the role of local government, and this is set out in the community charter. The purposes of municipality or regional district, providing for good government, providing for services, laws, and matters for community benefit, stewardship of public assets, and fostering economic, social, and environmental well-being. So it's generally accepted that there's a continuum of housing. Everything from non-market to market, beginning with at one end emergency shelters, supportive housing, non-market rental, secondary rental, then moving into affordable and market ownership housing. That's not to say that all of these different types of housing have to be provided in electoral areas, and realistically they can't be, because a lot of them will depend on services, being located close to transit, etc. I wanted to highlight that there are some forms of rental housing or accessory housing that are emerging, particularly with on the market side of the housing spectrum, including boarding. That being different than lodging. So lodging is like a hotel room, but boarding, so a room and board within a dwelling. People staying with intergenerational type of housing situations, staying with family. Secondary suites, obviously, we know about, or detached suites, and then movable dwellings, which actually can be lawfully constructed forms of accessory housing. So I wanted to show this slide because when you look at the pictures of different types of structures, it might not be automatically clear what is a dwelling or what might actually be a vehicle. And we have everything from, right on the right side of the picture there is a stick-built home built to the BC Building Code. We also have the A277s on the other end of the spectrum there, the A277 modular home, which is acceptable under the BC Building Code, built for year-round use. A CSA Z240 mobile home, which is also acceptable under the BC Building Code, and for year-round use. And then we have in the sort of middle of the picture there, we have a CSA Z241 park model RV and a CSA Z240 RV, which are both regulated under the Motor Vehicle Act. They're essentially vehicles, recreational vehicles. Interestingly, Mr. Brisky will correct me if I'm wrong here, but you could have a CSA Z240 mobile home constructed on chassis. Yes? Yes. So you can have a lawful two-code or two-standard built structure on a chassis under the CSA Z240 MH standard. So if there are further detailed questions about these standards, I would refer all of those questions to Mr. Brisky, and I won't say any more at this point. So that's just kind of to indicate what the CBRD building inspection deems as acceptable versus not acceptable. And as I said, when you look at them at first blush, they all kind of look the same, right? It's very difficult, and it's very difficult to know without getting a close look at how they're constructed. These are just examples of different labels that get placed on these homes and vehicles that indicate the certification, and typically our building inspectors will be looking for these labels when they're looking to confirm that they are compatible with the required CSA standards. Okay, so tenure type. So tenure is the financial arrangement and ownership structure under which someone has the right to live in a dwelling. I got that from Wikipedia. So there's essentially kind of 4 key types. One's tenancy, so you're renting a dwelling or part of a dwelling. Ownership, you own your dwelling. Cooperative, is a kind of a type of residential arrangement where you own shares in a nonprofit corporation. It's not managed under the Residential Tenancy Act, because you're a shareholder in this corporate entity. And then there's rent to own, which is kind of really interesting, and it's not something that's very common in British Columbia, but we're starting to see more of it. I think a couple years ago, the federal government actually had a fund where they were trying to incentivize this type of development. The picture on the slide is not something we'll probably ever see in electoral areas, but I wanted to show it as an example of development in North Vancouver where this was I believe a mixed-use development, but they actually included a few rent-to-own units. I believe it was 8 units, and they had something like 700 or 800 people who wanted those 8 units. Like, there was such a high demand for the ability to get into housing that you knew would eventually be something that you would own. Even though you weren't able to own it on day one, you knew there was a path for you to get to ownership within probably 5 years. So that's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind for future advocacy, perhaps. Okay, so let's talk about strategies for electoral areas. I did provide a report to Committee of the Whole last week that wasn't discussed in great depth. In fact, it was referred, or I should say postponed, to a future meeting. And that's okay, I'm sure you all read it and have the background. But there are some things that you could do as a board, and then there are some things you can do as electoral areas. So we'll focus on policies and regulations, some of the financial tools, advocacy and education, and enforcement. So on policies and regulations at the highest level currently, we have OCP policies. So your OCP is going to include required policies around residential development. Now, that will have to be for a period of 20 years. The policies are currently in your electoral areas OCP. Modernized OCP is under development, and will be a final draft of that will be created once the housing needs reports are finalized. We actually just got the methodology yesterday for completing the interim housing needs report, so you should see that updated final draft ready for first reading OCP this fall. And it's looking like the housing needs reports are going to play a really strong role in terms of shaping the OCP policies and then the required zoning regulations to implement the OCP and to meet the needs that are being identified in your housing needs report. So I won't say too much more about that because we could spend all day on that, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. But at the highest level also, the OCP can stipulate the kinds of housing that you want, could identify inclusionary housing policy, for instance, saying that, when you are considering major development of, 100 units, 200 units, perhaps a proportion or percentage of those units are actually dedicated as perpetually affordable housing. So policy can guide that kind of discussion. The zoning will specify the type of housing you're allowing in different parts of your communities, the density, the number of dwellings, and then tenure. And this is something that hasn't really been too much of a focus in the past, but there is provision for housing for local government to actually regulate tenure. So if you want to ensure that, manufactured home parks, for instance, are protected as rental, you can apply rental tenure zoning to those home parks. Pre-zoning versus rezoning. So as noted with the housing needs reports, we're going to have to demonstrate that those needs can be met through zoning, and there'll be a requirement to have pre-zoning to meet the needs. We've seen a little bit of that with the Bill 44 legislation. You've been required to have minimum prescribed standards, dwelling in a secondary suite on most properties, and there may be more coming in the future. And then there's rezoning, where you're considering now changing your zoning to accommodate usually more dwelling units, and then with that, the opportunity to secure a housing agreement that might protect a number of units, like I noted, for perpetually affordable housing. And then there's temporary use permits, and I didn't want to talk too much about this because it will be the subject of a future report to EASC as per previous direction, but obviously temporary use permit can authorize something that's not already permitted under the zoning regulations. So recommended interim zoning amendments, recognizing that we are going through a process of developing a comprehensive zoning bylaw. There should be lots of public engagement to help shape the regulations that are developed and adopted, but in the interim, there are some things I think that the EAC should consider that may help a little bit with current housing situation. So one is around this regulation that allows temporary camping while constructing a dwelling, and this provision doesn't exist in all of the electoral area bylaws. It is in some, and generally where the regulation does exist, it refers to the principal dwelling being constructed. So doesn't necessarily allow for temporary occupancy of an RV per se, while somebody's building a lawful detached or attached suite. And so the zoning amendment would allow that. And then further to this, we have a requirement currently for covenants to be registered on title when this happens, and to ensure that when the occupancy is received, that temporary use is discontinued. And we're looking at the option of getting away from that covenant requirement and moving to a statutory declaration, just as another way of making housing more affordable. Can be, it's a burden on both the owner and the CBRD, to be honest, in terms of having to require covenants. So getting away from that requirement. Allowing dwellings built to an acceptable standard for year-round. So what this refers to is just ensuring that permitted detached dwellings can be built to either the BC Building Code or a CSA approved standard under the building that's acceptable under the building code. And then the third point here is a suggestion that the Works and Services bylaw be amended to allow on-site water storage. So we are seeing applications come forward now where it's being demonstrated that there isn't sufficient water flow on the property to support an accessory dwelling. And so we can just say, no, you can't have your dwelling because you don't have enough water, or we can say, through an amendment, allow for the provision of cisterns or other water collection system to be able to meet the needs of the dwelling. And again, if there are detailed questions on that, I will defer to Mr. Brisky, who's my backup here. Okay, and then I want to just flag a few things for potential consideration under the development of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. So looking at potentially considering a consistent maximum size for suites across electoral areas. They range from, I think, 65 to 95, and then there's a different requirement for lands within the ALR. Considering potentially the option of a small bonus dwelling. So if you have a very large property, if you've already got a detached or an accessory dwelling, perhaps allowing a third small dwelling that would have very small footprint. Considering, as I noted before, rental tenure zoning, and then considering also the opportunity to pre-zone for RV and manufactured home parks, which we know are an incredibly important opportunity for affordable housing. So, and the photo here is Bluegrass Meadows Micro Village, which is in the Kitimat-Stikine Regional District, and these are approved, CSA approved dwellings in a sort of a camp site type configuration. So some of the financial tools recommended, looking at our community amenity contributions, again, the EASC has directed that staff do further work on the proposed policy for community amenity contributions, and so we're recommending that that we make some changes to that to, first of all, prioritize contributions to affordable housing when the vacancy rate is less than 3%, and that we engage a consultant to help with finalizing or finalizing that work, in addition to drafting an amenity cost charge bylaw. And so currently we are, well, I guess this has been going on for quite some time. There's been a very sort of ad hoc approach to negotiation for community amenity contributions. And we've heard frustration from, staff, the public applicants on how that's done. And so there's an opportunity again to, through engagement with a qualified economist, to actually come up with some figures, some reasonable figures for amenity costs that would be paid at the time of rezoning. And then the third there is just prioritizing affordable housing. So the time for processing applications obviously contributes to cost. And so when somebody comes forward with a proposal for affordable housing, whether that's a detached or an attached secondary suite or other form of affordable housing, it's staff's recommendation that type of application be prioritized. I've underlined affordable because there are situations where in the past developers have come forward and have said, I'm going to provide affordable housing, right? And really the question should be then, how are you providing the affordable housing? What are you doing to secure it? And I can go back and show you public hearing minutes where there was a promise for affordable housing, and that affordable housing is now wildly unaffordable. So there is a way to secure it, right? And that's generally through a housing agreement. Okay. Advocacy and education, we can definitely do more around educating people about opportunities that exist, like the Provincial Secondary Suites grant program, and we can also help point people to the resources that are available. So BC Housing does have a number of assistance programs, and the Cowichan Housing Association also has some housing navigation services. And so when the public is approaching you as individual electoral area directors, and don't hesitate to send them to staff, but also point to these other resources that are available. And then, of course, you're well aware of your advocacy abilities through ABICC, UBCM, and minister meetings. And then, lastly, through bylaw enforcement, certainly there's an opportunity to release some pressure on housing stock that can be made available for longer term use. And I don't think I need to really go into much detail there. We've had a lot of discussion about these particular topics. There is a recommendation that staff continue to exercise discretion on a case-by-case basis when dealing with complaints involving unlawful housing, while prioritizing health, safety, and environmental protection. So there are the recommendations. I don't want to read them. They're long. I will stop sharing now.
And now get ready for questions. I turn to committee. I got a couple. Okay, I'll prime the pump. I'll start with the first one, and I know you said you could talk all day about the housing needs assessment. We now have the parameters by which it should be developed. Is there a need for us to start thinking about a workshop, or can it be presented in a report? You said it was going to be pretty impactful on us moving forward. What are your thoughts on that without getting into too much detail?
Thank you, Chair. So there will be a report, I believe, the second meeting in July from Strategic Initiatives talking about the modernized OCP. And I think that would be a good opportunity to sort of talk about the housing needs reports as well, because they'll feed directly into that policy document. So we can flag that.
Okay, thank you. My second question, I just thought of a third one, but you mentioned the prioritize affordable housing, and you mentioned time frame as money, and certainty is also very important. But practically speaking, how would your department prioritize process-wise an expedited affordable housing application?
I think is Ms. Pressman. I'm not sure if Ms. Pressman's on the WebEx. She might just be watching the live stream. So it would be a matter of actually identifying those files that are coming forward for, you know, the types of housing that the committee and board want to prioritize, and essentially just moving them off the list. It's as simple as that.
Okay, Director Segal, I've got a third. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I just went to a presentation yesterday on the complete communities assessment that Strategic Initiatives did. And so for Area A, 52% of people that live there actually can't afford to live there, which I found really interesting. And, you know, a lot of the modeling of how our community is going to develop in the future doesn't actually change the affordability. But the consultant, when I asked him like what actually would do that, it's not, you know, not just affordable housing, but a diversity of housing. So projects that do, or development applications that include townhomes, cluster houses, apartments, you know, having that kind of variety, because in Area A, our average home price is well over $1 million, because we only have a lot of large single-family dwellings. Yeah, and I refer back to also when I saw Gregor Craigie speak, it's just, he said, like, it's not, obviously we have an affordability crisis, but it's not just affordable homes that we need. We actually need homes at all levels. So I guess I'd love to see like prioritization of like any applications that are not just large single family dwellings, that like promote the diversity of housing options in electoral areas. And then, like, I guess I don't really have a question. Like, yeah, I'm supportive of everything that you've, you know, brought forward in this report. But I think that I would love to see more like crisis management kind of options. Because, you know, exercising discretion in bylaw, of course I like that, but I do know that that means people in their homes are just being held in a lurch on a month-to-month basis, and I just don't think that's a really enjoyable way to live, and I'd love for there to be more options.
Thanks. Any other questions? Director Burton.
So I thank Director Segal for the segue about that topic, because I see, and I think staff have come up with the idea of camping while you're building your second dwelling, which means, in my mind, that we're finding a way for people that have the means to use an RV. And I'm trying to find a way that if all you have, and that's your shelter, and that's where you are, to camp, and is there a way for us to utilize that, or I guess that's through the staff, to permit camping for other reasons than building a second dwelling? Do you see anything out there that would give another tool?
Chair, through you to Director Martman. So that's a big question, and certainly would warrant conversation in the local area plan discussions and through the development of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. But ultimately, I do believe, as I noted, that we need to be looking at the opportunity for more RV campgrounds, more manufactured home parks, and potentially pre-zoning for those. And they could also potentially be located on lands that are owned by the regional district, or in the case of the municipality. And when there is a level of local government involvement, then there can be some control around costs. Because we know that even those types of arrangements privately within the region are escalating, right? So I think that when my report goes back to the committee of the whole, which for sort of an examination of options that are perhaps available to the board, there could be discussion about potentially about the use of land holdings, or actually constructing something or building something.
Follow up?
So I'm feeling like there's a bit of a separation. The committee of the whole will be looking at something more comprehensive around what might be done. I guess the thing is that the need is immediate and it's now. And that if the board gives this priority, like, can something be shifted within the year to where you start saying, yes, we have a site where RVs could go to and you could camp? Or are we talking things that are likely that wouldn't occur for a year or out further?
I think, through you, Chair, I think staff that's a difficult question to answer right now. We'd have to do some research to determine, how long it would take to mobilize a site. It's really premature.
I would propose that if the electoral areas thought of this a little differently than our municipal partners, that we should create the initiative and the incentive and the momentum to proceed further with that, and I'd be fully supportive. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I'm wondering about amenity contribution policy, bylaw, and reserve fund. So we're going to go down this road, so presumably we'll get more resources put aside into a reserve fund. What happens to that? How does that happen?
So that could obviously be fleshed out when, through you, Chair, when staff bring back a proposal around the community amenity contribution policy and a proposed amenity contribution or cost charge bylaw, and how those funds could be used. But I think there are various options they could be used to provide grants or subsidies to people that want to build new housing. They could be used potentially as grants or subsidies for rental housing. I think there are lots of opportunities for the use of funds, or they could go into a funds for CBRD developed housing.
Or to buy a campground.
Potentially.
So is there a more direct way of requiring affordable housing in developments? Like, I'm thinking we're going down the road in Mill Bay with Stonebridge and potentially in Pauldy. Like, can we not require a certain percentage of affordable?
Through you, Chair. So there is relatively new legislation, Bill 16, it's hard to keep track, that is looking at the opportunity for inclusionary zoning and the requirement for fixed number of affordable units within within a development, and staff would have to come back with more details on that. I would probably get a lawyer in front of you to explain that.
Okay, so can I follow up with a question? So is there, do we have time to do that before these new developments proceed and have that happen, or is the horse already out of the gate on those?
No, I mean, this is the time you're developing a modernized OCP. So there's an opportunity within that OCP to include a policy around inclusionary housing and requirement for prescribed number of affordable units in new development. And that, in fact, was a recommendation that I was going to put forward. But then I sat back and thought about it and thought about the fact that we have an interim housing needs report that's going to come. And that housing needs report is going to inform this body about the types of housing and the types and the tenures of housing that are needed. And that at that time, I think will be a good opportunity to consider what policies and regulations might be needed to implement the requirements using the data.
Yeah, I just feel like we should be getting onto it, because I think I agree with Director Segal. I think we need things across the board, so why do we, I mean, it's really important. Why don't we get going?
I have a question for Mr. Brisky, I think. It's just in general observation of the housing types and the certifications and the like, I get a sense that there's folks probably today contemplating starting a tiny home built project, and given that most are likely to do that out behind the back of the house or back of the shed, there's not much chance that there's going to be any sort of inspection or review of what they're doing, and then it's transported to a site, placed on a pad or whatever, and we come in and say, oh, nope, you can't do that. So my question is, given they're, in a sense, a form of, I don't know, I'm assuming they're a form of a stick-built structure, is there the possibility for us to develop a streamlined and simplified inspection? And I know that you would probably defer to an engineer that would, design something, and we would hope it would be built as drawn, but is there any potential for us to develop a streamlined inspection, simplified inspection process that would not add a financial burden, but would bring the people into the inspection system, where I think a side benefit would be that it would be designed, it would be as safe and as close to code as we could make it, but also there would be access to information on siting and requirements around sewer and water and those sorts of access for fire equipment, that sort of thing. Do you get where I'm going with this? So, or would that be something more on a provincial scale that would need to be developed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, something that Ann and I have discussed already is, and we're part of a provincial initiative as well with regard to the standardized plans, right? So we are exploring the idea of a sort of pre-approved building that would suit our region and, meet our requirements and would be, a simple thing to kind of move forward on and be educated about. With regard to the backyard build tiny home, something I might not have touched on well this morning was really that, the cost to build something like that is really not much different by the square foot as if I was going to stick build something to code, or if I was going to purchase a CSA A277 model. Of course, there comes the cost of developing the land and, having a foundation or excavation, additional well, septic, whatever. But the A277 really simplifies things. Like, essentially what that standard means is that a prefabricated dwelling was built inside of a factory and it was inspected without us having to go and do it. So if somebody brings me a set of drawings or a building permit application for an A277, we can be assured it really already was inspected, and we can, make sure it has an adequate foundation, much like a Z240MH model, which there are many very affordable used options online. Recycled dwellings as well that, there's contractors that offer those as well for good price. And it takes a lot of the, framing, insulation, inspection out of it, and it's really just sort of an administrative building permit to make sure it's sited properly and has an adequate foundation.
Thank you for that, and that sort of leads me to the second question. Within a lot of municipalities, if someone's got a piece of property and they go into the municipality, they can be offered a choice of 4 different building styles that would be suitable for their region. Are we contemplating anything like that for electoral areas? It may not be appropriate in some of the more rural areas, but is that something that we as an organization can do, given that municipalities are starting to do that? It ends up being a streamlined permitting process. They're pre-approved, they engineered, all of that stuff is done. Is that something that we could contemplate?
Absolutely it is. And there are a number of initiatives throughout the country right now that are sort of well ahead of where we are. I mentioned that we did have a tour with a modular housing group a couple weeks ago, and there are technologies out there available right now. Like, one of the big concerns, especially in the rural areas, is with pre-approved designs, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can put it next to a riparian area or on a steep slope or something like that. But there are technologies available where an owner can go online, search their own property, and pick from 1 or half a dozen designs, and the technology will let the owner know that, oh, that might fit there, or no, it won't. So these things are available. They might not necessarily be something that we have to facilitate. Industry might do that for us, but it's certainly viable and it's out there.
Director Martman.
I'm not sure who can comment on this, but in last November, so a few months ago, Verdon's City Council amended its policies to allow trailers and recreation vehicles to be used as secondary dwellings on ALR, according to provincial regulation. Do we have barriers in place that would prevent that, or is that something that's available?
I may need a little bit of help on this one, Director Martman, but my understanding really is that, the Land Commission doesn't so much regulate the construction of buildings. So certainly if they wanted to consider a vehicle to be some kind of dwelling, they can do that, but our building regulation or otherwise zoning regulation would still be applicable in that same regard.
Chair, I just wanted to add that typically where we see those types of variations between with ALC's regulations is because they're trying to accommodate for temporary farm worker housing, which tends to be seasonal.
I'm waiting for one
Yes,
more.
3 for 3 here, because I'm aware of the case you're talking about. I actually saw that. It was a bylaw case that went on for 18 months. So the ultimate resolution there was that because it was an ALR, they decided that Vernon would no longer have it in their bylaw. So it just became almost unregulated territory. So that's why Vernon is not taking any action, because they're ignoring it. They don't have a bylaw anymore that looks after that, I believe. I think they just said because it was in the ALR that they would let the ALR look after it. And if I can put the last piece on this, because this was the disturbing one that I came across. The definition on the ALR of where somebody could reside, it actually could have been a vehicle, like a car. So how it got permitted.
I guess I'm looking at every opportunity to explore. And I don't know if this is worth for staff to explore and see how that's working out for Vernon and working out as an option perhaps for, while we're having a housing crisis. So, but I don't know if that's the rest of the committee would want to direct that.
Ms. Terrell?
I think that, through you, Chair, we've looked at a lot of different jurisdictions and talked to lots of people across Vancouver Island and the province, and generally speaking, local governments don't allow vehicles to be used as dwellings in their zoning regulations, period.
Your final remark.
Except when we're camping, well, there's a building being, yeah, I know, but we call it camping, but we all know that the actual truth is that people will be living in it for, a period of time. And I think we get into my perspective, and with all due respect, I think we get into semantics about saying, well, no, that's a dwelling, so that's okay. That's camping because you're in an RV, but in the end, we are achieving the same things. It's what we live in for a period of time. And so I guess I'm struggling because we know that there's cases where it's dire for people to find a place. And it's not people that just come here. I've had people call me and say, where can I go? And I'm going like, I don't know where you can go, and so I'd love to be able to find little solutions that don't cause big consequences for the next, until we can say something like we have a vacancy rate of 3% or some parameter that like the BC Bill 44 or Bill 35 has in place. So anyways, I'm just scrambling, just putting things out there. Thank you.
Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple questions and then maybe just a quick comment. Was there any area in the electoral service areas that was like identified or earmarked for high density? Was that, was there specific areas? Was that taken into account? That makes sense. Like from high rises, multi-story buildings. Did we identify any key areas among the electoral areas that's identified for higher density?
Ms. Terrell, I'm thinking local area plan, growth containment boundaries, but beyond that, I doubt it.
We have few areas within the regional district electoral areas that would have both water and sewer services available. I think perhaps Eagle Heights might be one of the only areas, maybe out in area of Honeymoon Bay potentially, but we are quite limited even in the Cowichan Bay area. There's an extreme sort of limitation on sewer units. So even where we have some what appears to be urban areas that were, it would be, theoretically acceptable to have higher density, it can be really challenging because the servicing isn't there either on the sewer side or the water side.
Yeah, thank you. And I wasn't necessarily suggesting that's something we do. I was just curious to know if it was identified. Another one that's, I'm sure you've taken into consideration or looked, is there any additional land swaths that maybe rezone, like whether we're dealing with mosaic or like things that are on the, seems like a lot of some of the issues we're running into is, land, at least part of it. It's part of the problem anyways. I know we're trying to do infill, but yeah, thoughts on that?
Through you, Chair, I think that staff could report back to committee on that at a later date.
Yeah, I think staff are working on something.
Okay. One last comment. I just, when I actually was in a meeting earlier today with Director Martment and Chair Stone, and just when we're talking about economic development, I find this extremely challenging because, there's still a large segment of people that don't want to see things change, and then also we're living in this dire situation for the other side of the coin. It's as a director, just want to acknowledge it's a very challenging situation to try to make this work. I just want to acknowledge both sides of the coin here.
Thank you for that, Director McClinton. And Director Segal, go ahead.
Thank you. I thought of a question through all of that. What is the definition of year-round living for the RV living?
Mr. Brisky.
Director Segal, I mean, it's 4 month a year, 365. With respect to RVs, you know, manufacturers have stated that they're only designed for 6 or 9 month living. When temperatures start to drop, a lot of these units aren't designed to, you know, have space heaters plugged in, and the building envelope, you know, kind of leads to mold growth essentially. So a 12 month a year dwelling would have, you know, proper ventilation systems and envelopes and heating systems and things like that to combat.
Mr. McDonald.
Just a really quick comment. I think what we're meaning is probably 4 seasons too, because when you're saying different month, we're actually saying that the 4th season, the winter month, is the one it's probably not designed for. I was just trying to look it up actually on the Manufactured Home Association, because I think they actually detail that, so I couldn't find it fast enough. But
I might add as well too that I've done a little bit more research with the CSA, Canadian Standards Association. They're sort of catching up to this issue as well, and my understanding is they're going to stop certifying units to the CSA Z240 RV standard if they are advertised for anything such as year-round living. So we'll see where that goes.
Follow up.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think just like Director Martman, I'm, you know, grasping at straws if there's like a loophole of a 2-week vacation in there. Could that, you know, make something possible? And I just want to like reiterate something that Director Martman said, which is that we're saying it's okay to live in an RV if you're building a home, which prioritizes, you know, privileged landowners. We're saying for that circumstance, they're allowed to live in an RV, but that we're not allowing anyone else to live in an RV year-round, which just, do you see the 2-tier? It just like really feels like stigmatizing poverty, and I think that's why I know you're not intentionally doing that, but I just would love to see a way out of that.
Mr. McDonald?
I will comment on that. What we're looking at, and it's a combination of really trying to help out with the housing crisis, but also keep compliance. So it's kind of a stepping stone. It's not perfect. We realize that we're actually sort of bending the rules a little bit by saying, well, we're actually, I understand what Director Martman is saying, we're allowing that, but what we're also saying is that these RVs are going onto somebody else's property. So we're saying, well, that person's bringing that onto the property, and we have the provision now that you could have a suite, and you have all these, you know, I think it's up to $40,000 of a non-forgivable loan you can get. So there's also kinds of incentives there. So we're saying, well, okay, as an incentive, which we didn't have before, we're saying we only ever did have that for somebody building the single-family dwelling. So what we're trying to do now, encourage knowing that RV is there, and we're saying, well, you also have the, you know, legally you could build the suite. We're trying to come up with encouragement for the homeowner to build suite. So it's not really going to be the person who couldn't afford it. They're still going to be in that RV until the homeowner who could afford it builds the suite, and then we would get compliance again. So that's what we're looking at, is that we'd still have the density the way it's supposed to be, but sort of a path to compliance.
Okay. I feel like I misunderstood something. Thank you.
Well, there's another component to this which has been debated numerous times over the years, is there's an end date to the construction of the initial home, and the RV is going to be generally rendered, you know, not a secondary unit, which if that's the case, it doesn't begin to encourage the construction of shelters over top and rooms out the back and that sort of thing, and those tend to be you know, part of the challenge that are faced. So I get the concept, and unfortunately sometimes the buildings don't go up as per schedule as they should, and it does cause angst in the community when people have extended building periods and are living in these for longer periods of time. I've heard it in my community, so. Ms. Sherulf, I think we're winding down to an end here. Any final comments, remarks?
I have just one more comment in regards to the temporary occupancy during building construction, and that is, it's generally most desirable to build when it's warmer. And so, people aren't sort of choosing to, build and stay in an RV type situation while constructing for a protracted period or over the winter months. So we're, looking at that. I asked Mr. Brisky, how long does it take to build a house these days? And he says that it should take about 7 months. And then ideally you're doing that, from spring to fall, and not over the winter months. So just wanted to add that. And not everybody's going to live in an RV while they're building a home, right?
Thank you for that. So I believe we have a resolution that hasn't been moved or seconded, has it? Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by alternate Director Champ. Any further discussion on that item? I'll call a question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Sherulf. That was a very thorough report. We appreciate it. And now we go to, I think, who's the author of the next one? Ms. Miles Wilson. We to understand hotels are expensive?
Well, since we're on the topic of accommodations, this one is a little bit more optional. But nonetheless, we have a report in front of you today regarding travel to the UBCM convention in September, which is going to be in Vancouver this year. And the recommendation in front of you is that you allocate $13,500 from the community information budget to support the attendance of all electoral area directors, so all 9, for attendance and travel for the convention. So the report is very short and sweet, but outlines that the accommodations are significantly higher than anticipated. There's a little bit of information in there for you regarding other options as well, but I'm here and happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Ms. Miles Wilson? Director Martman.
So the question is, what is the per daily cost for a hotel room? And I have a follow-up.
So what I understand is they are 40 to 50% higher cost than we anticipated. So usually our rates are around the high 300s to 4 per night, but yeah, it's significantly higher than that. So you've got in the financial section there the total budget, which is we've budgeted just over $20,000 for the whole week. Significant.
Follow up.
Yeah, so thanks, and I was just trying to also tease out another number, so I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. And that is that if it's a shortfall of 13,000 and it's basically, or the other option is only 5 directors go, then am I correct to say basically 13,000 would cover the cost of 4 directors? So the individual cost per director is about $3,000?
Correct. So these are hotel costs, and so we've added in the cost for the full, including per diem and whatnot. So yeah, it's a significant cost. It's definitely downtown Vancouver rates, so it's very high.
Thanks for that, and I guess confirming that, I would just step away. I just can't see going. I see some directors will need to go. There may be some things that we're doing business with, but I'm not on that list this year, and so I would forego mine to drop the costs.
Thank you. Turn to Director Segal.
I'll move the recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Director Martman?
So you would be able to adjust for that? Like the recommendation is
Go ahead.
So the recommendation is that the budget would become available, but it would be obviously at your discretion whether you wanted to attend or not, but we would have full budget if everyone did want to attend. They would have the opportunity to do so.
Director McClinton.
When would you need to know that by, Danielle? Like,
Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director McClinton. Registration is opening on the 2nd of July, and I was going to send out after this meeting, later this week, early next week, the call for attendance.
Thank you.
Director Nicholson.
So have we secured some hotel rooms already?
We have.
Whereabouts would they be?
It's called the Exchange Hotel Vancouver.
Is it very close to where the?
It's close-ish.
I think if I'm going to go, I will just go for the day. I won't stay overnight.
All right, we have the resolution before us. We can make individual decisions as the deadline draws near. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Where does that take us to, Ms. Boyd?
If you'd like to expedite to question period number 11.
We are now at question period. Now's the time where we would invite members that have been really steadfast and committed to come forward and ask a weary chair any questions about what went on today.
Mr. Chair, I will reference my earlier public input and use the same metaphor that I used then and ask if it would be possible to offer the public some water, because on this side of the room, it would also go a long way towards creating a water cooler atmosphere where staff or elected officials could mingle during the breaks, and we would also have an opportunity before the meetings to greet newcomers, some of us who come here a long time. Anyway, I'm pontificating. The point is, would we be able to get water, please?
We'll make sure that staff consider that and see what we can do.
Okay. May I ask one more question?
Go ahead.
Okay. When the CVRD does communications on social media or an elected official or staff, I don't know how it works, but those would be, is it safe to assume that those fall under the respectful spaces bylaw that's being put forward?
Well, that's a bit of a stretch for me because we don't have the bylaw before us. So I think I would have to get back to you when we've considered the respectful spaces bylaw and the applicability to social media and individual director engagement.
Okay, I would really appreciate follow-up.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Kaufman, can we answer some questions for you today?
You can. That was very insightful of you, Mr. Chair. Speaking to R8, there was a whole lot of information unpacked there, and I think a lot of it is skirting around the use of RVs and tiny homes, and where these living accommodations are going is in the rural areas, and it is a growing problem, and we are starting to see like little micro villages appearing in our residential neighborhoods without the benefit of water, without the benefit of services such as sewer. And we live in what is described as high risk for wildfire. So I hope that will the committee put more emphasis on developing housing than they will allowing living in RVs, which isn't safe, as we heard from Mr. Brusky, and tiny homes. Yes.
I understand your question perfectly, and some were skirting and some were skating. So, yes, it's I think the responsibility of this committee and of this organization to do all we can to ensure appropriate and affordable housing. And I can tell you that one of the major federal party leaders who spoke at FCM reiterated that party's commitment to housing first as a major societal foundation for a lot of the issues that we face, whether it be unhoused people with mental health issues, whether it is people who are suffering from mental health and addictions issues. It's all about housing. And I think that inappropriate housing in inappropriate locations has been a natural progression as individuals that are precariously housed or have limited in the way of protection are discouraged from establishing inside municipal boundaries, and they're migrating to places where they're less likely to be harassed. The downside of that, and I'm seeing it in my community where RVs parked in back alleys that were their recreational vehicles are now accommodation, hooked up to power lines and hoses. And it's beginning to impact the quality of life in people's communities that they never expected that when they first moved there. So I hear what you're saying. I hear you loud and clear, and I would hope that this committee and our municipal partners are doing everything within their power, which is limited to some extent, to ensure that these small communities aren't developing in inappropriate locations and having negative impacts on the surrounding neighborhoods. So I hear you loud and clear.
Thank you for that. And it also becomes the enforcement component, right? Because right now, enforcement boils down to a neighbor complaining about a neighbor. And that's a very unfortunate situation because nobody wants to be there. On-site water storage was talked about in that policy. And I'm just wondering about the safety of that. Who's going to regulate that on the storage? Because we've heard previously when you're putting on an accessory dwelling, not an accessory, I guess a detached accessory,
dwelling.
yeah, that they have to have their own well, because otherwise it constitutes a water system if you share a same well. So how will that be?
Well, I can't, properly and in an informed way answer that specifically, but to me, it's the additional storage will be a non-potable source from what I understand, so that it would need to be by necessity for washing and toilet flushing and the likes, and that is my understanding of what generally is thought of for the additional storage, rainwater storage, that sort of thing. So I don't know if that offers the opportunity for a single well on a property when someone wants to develop a detached dwelling or even attached dwelling, whether the single source approved potable well could serve both units if there was additional rainwater storage and capture available for other purposes. It would certainly create less demand for the approved potable well service. But again, this is Island Health and our provincial regulators that have the jurisdiction over what is an approved supply or not. So it's a very good question, and I think I hear or saw Mr. McDonald over there nodding when I gave the answer, so that's the best I got for you right now.
Okay, thank you. And seeing that there's no one else here, I do have
Fire away.
I have a
but
question.
Make it your last one, okay? Please.
Actually, it's from Mr. Evans. He wasn't able to attend today. And he's talking to the Malahat Forest.
The fire
hall.
Yeah.
Okay, so he says that the Forest is getting away too cheap on the estimate of 500 or thereabouts in the building of a fire hall. They must realize that there is a lot more to it than just a single bay. Should have there been more than just one estimate related? Should there be two other estimates not related to the Malahat Forest?
Good question, and I could have guessed as soon as you had mentioned our friend Mr. Evans's name that he was going to say that the estimate was too low and that there should have been more, and he's got experience and real world experience in that sort of assessment. This is one of those where my understanding, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of finance staff, but we, in certain circumstances, have to basically acquiesce to the experts and the people that have the correct authority and designation to make these assessments. There would likely be, if someone has signed off on saying that that is the true and accurate assessment, that it would be a pretty close to that number, and if professional standards are upheld, then any other estimates that would come in should be in that general range. I don't know that anyone would have wanted to have done that in done that exercise 2 or 3 times. But it's certainly of the desire of the committee to question that before it gets to the board. It could be questioned at the board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. Thank you, Ms. Bernard. We are, I think, where, Ms. Boyd? City of Duncan, 175 Ingram Street.
Adjournment, if you'd like.
Motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded.